Okay, it is 6:00 p.m. Tonight is June 17th, 2021. This is the Upper Dublin School District Finance Committee meeting. I will call the meeting to order. We have most of the committee here. Mike Henderson is not here at the moment, but he'll be here any minute. I know that Mr. Ropsky as well may at times be stepping away, but he is here. Darlene Davis is here. We have a number of other board members and administrators and some distinguished guests. And let's get right into it because we have a good long agenda. First up, we have a presentation from Dewey Engineering about our transportation facility feasibility study. Arif, you want to take it away?
Yeah, and Mr. Sirota, if I could, I'm just going to give a brief introduction and then go to Arif. So I just want to kind of give a little background quick before we turn it over. So earlier this year, we began discussions regarding the opportunity to use a parcel of our land, the district-owned land, for a potential future transportation facility. If you remember, the primary recommendation for exploring the opportunity was to end a facility lease that is costing the district around $450,000 annually. And one of the key things we did say in there, and I think that's important as you hear the presentation tonight as we look forward, is we talked about doing it in a cost neutral manner based on an estimated cost of around $5 million. Secondarily, we looked at it to aim to provide a safer, cleaner facility working environment for our transportation department as well. At the February board meeting, the board authorized a feasibility study to be completed by Dewey Engineering after an RFP process was completed. And the proposal estimated this process would take about 3 months to complete, and then the report would be shared with this committee. So discussing tonight kind of puts us right on track of what our proposed timeline was to get this feasibility study done. What you will hear tonight is a draft report only. Just for the committee, board members, and anyone listening, no one should walk away thinking that the board will be asked to approve this project to move forward tonight. This is really just an update on where we're at, and then Arif and Dewey will make some recommendations for next steps that the board could consider if they're still interested in moving this project forward. So with that said, I'll turn it over to Arif. Thank you for being here tonight, and if you can give us your presentation, we'd appreciate it.
Arif, you're muted.
Here we go. Now we're good. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you again. Thanks, Mark, and thank you, Andy. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. I wish I were there in person, but I think that's coming soon. At least we're all not wearing masks today. So thank you for that. Brooke is going to control the slide presentation. So if you just jump to the next slide, Brooke. So the next slide, I did want to acknowledge, while Brooke's doing that, I did want to acknowledge the school board for giving us the opportunity to continue our relationship with the school district. We've done many projects for you, and we certainly appreciate the fact that you entrust these type of studies and facility projects to us. So thank you very much for that. I do want to recognize that in putting this information together and working through this, to get it to this point for your consideration and review. Of course, we worked with Dr. Yanni, we worked with Andy Leckman, we worked with Chris Robbins, who was instrumental in helping with programming. And of course, Bob Lester was also involved in all of our meetings to get to this point where we're able to present the information to you. So if you go to the next slide, Brooke. Just a reminder of the site that we were looking at. If you see in the upper portion of the project, you see our high school, and then you see the township complex, and you see the site area sort of outlined there. On the bottom of the site outline, you will see Fort Washington Elementary School. And there are going to be some close-ups, but I do want to spend just a minute for you to look at this. The reason this site was looked at way back many years ago when the high school project was done, and then why it's being looked at again, is currently, if you look just up from Fort Washington Elementary School, you see a huge clump of trees right there. I wish I could point and be there, but if you guys all know where Fort Washington is on the bottom of the slide there, And right there, so right where you had the arrow up a little bit, Brooke, is where the clump of trees is. So there's this entire set of trees. Right above, right to the right of that is the one baseball field, and right there you can see some additional trees bordering the baseball field. And then you see this gravelly looking area, and you see basically the Field of Dreams up to the north, and you see some of the structures there that support the batting cages and all that support the Field of Dreams. And you can see the gravel areas that are non-green, and you see all the green areas. And the focus of this project has always been to see how the facility could fit within the existing unused portions, the non-green areas is the focus has always been to where to put this facility. And you'll see as we get through the project, we came up with a really good solution, we feel, that encompasses the program needs and is able to fit it without disturbing any of that. The other thing that's important to recognize from this site is we're tucking it up against Fort Washington Expressway and against the service drive that comes off of Highland Avenue. And that service drive is the same one that's used for the municipal township services for all of the dump trucks and other vehicles. And they basically enter and exit off of Highland to get to this site area. So that's really important to kind of capture from this, and you get a feel for, you know, how kind of where it's located relative to the other facilities. So it's tucked behind Fort Washington Elementary School, it's tucked behind the Field of Dreams and up against the expressway. And I think this site plan just kind of puts that in perspective. So if you go to the next slide, this is the actual project site itself. And so what we started to do was we had to get an updated site survey, and we had to look at utilities and look at all of the other features and stormwater basins and just kind of make sure we had all of our dimensions right. So this is a typical site plan. It's hard for you to visualize the information contained here, but again, you can see Fort Washington on the bottom there, and you can see the Field of Dreams up to the top, and to the left, you see 309. Expressway there. So again, just focusing you in on where the actual site is. If you go to the next slide, it starts to get a little better and clearer for you here. So we wanted to show you some photographs, again, to show you exactly what it is. So these are actually drone photos, and you can see that was like kind of a Google, and you can see the same areas represented here. You could see the gravel areas and kind of that U-shaped around the wetlands and around the trees, and that's where we're trying to fit everything. You see the service drive, and up above you see the Field of Dreams, and you'll see some pictures here to help orient everybody and make sure everybody can see exactly what we're looking at. So the next slide, and I'll go through these quickly because I think most of you are familiar, and if you're not, a quick drive-by there will kind of really orient you. But again, these are photographs looking at the entrance off of Lockash, coming in down the driveway where sometimes students park, and as well as parking there for athletic use as well. So you see these two photos as you're coming in, and on the left you start to see that big clump of trees. On the bottom photo, you see the big clump of trees on the left, and they're evergreens and mixed in. All right, next slide. Thank you. So again, just some additional photos looking the opposite direction and just sort of seeing what's available there. And again, giving you a big picture of the unused portion of that site, sort of a gravelly dirt area at this point. Next slide. These are good pictures coming in off of Highland. It shows you again the view from all the way from Fort Washington, as well as looking up from Highland on the bottom. And so you can see the, again, the location of the site. Next, Brooke. And this is the last set of photos, right as you would picture it. On the first photo, you can see the basin discharge point, the concrete discharge point, and then you can sort of see the service drive, and you can see the bank going up to 309, and kind of really visualize how that is. And then the bottom photo is the actual entrance that would go into the potential bus facility if we were to proceed with the project. Next slide. So that's it for photographs. Now we go back to this aerial just to orient you again. And now you've seen the photos, you kind of see where the site is. And I just think this should just give you a good framework for the area that we're looking at to try to develop the solution for the district. All right, next slide, I think goes with an overlay. So this is what we did. This kind of shows you exactly how the proposed facility would fit. And you can see the existing trees are maintained, the existing fields are maintained, and what you'll see a blow up in a minute, but we wanted to give you an overall perspective. And you can see sort of in the salmon color is the new building, that would be the transportation building, and then you see all the black areas, that's the blacktop for supporting all the parking and fueling station and driveways to access the facility, the building, but more importantly for parking and exit and entrance. And we'll cover exit and entrance in a minute in another slide, but this gives you again a good view from a bird's eye view. Next slide, Brooke. So again, I wanted to kind of point out a couple of things on this slide that are we thought were important to highlight. One is, of course, we've talked about this, the wetland areas are to remain. We cannot disturb that. The existing stormwater basin, we're going to try to capitalize on that and expand that where we need to accommodate the additional impervious cover. There is some capacity in there already. The existing tree buffers would remain. And we wanted to point out that it is the actual bus facility, the building itself is about 100 feet away from the playground at Fort Washington Elementary School. And the actual location where the buses are parking and perhaps maybe idling when they start up in the morning is about 450 feet to the proposed bus parking from that same location, just to give you an idea. And that is beyond the tree line and the buffers that we've described. Okay, so that just gives you an idea of some dimensional information. Next, we wanted to kind of think about how would the traffic work and traffic flow. And the big advantage we have here is Chris and the district can pretty much, manage how do we get the vehicles in and out, both the bus drivers and staff, as well as, of course, the buses, the vans, and anything else that has to go in and out. So if you see on the red line says we're going to bring the bus drivers in from Lockash. And that's where the 45 approximately bus drivers will come in and out at various times. And we'll show you a chart that outlines that. And they'll come in and park in the parking lot that is there. And we'll show you that, as well as what'll happen is all of the buses will come off of Highland with the yellow arrow, and they'll come in. And you'll see later on, that's interesting. Just remember how they're coming in, because this was actually really cool. We have sort of angle parking for the buses, but what happens is the buses actually pull in and back into their space. Okay, they actually back into their space. So when they're leaving, they can just exit out. And somebody might ask, well, how do you do the diesel preheaters? They have a cord that does extend the length of the bus that they can plug in. And then the vans and buses would again exit with the orangish arrow, and they would exit back out onto the service drive. So you see nothing is happening on Lockash. All of the traffic is staying on Highland, and that current service drive was put in specifically for heavy duty vehicles that are coming and going from the township building, including dump trucks, as well as, of course, garbage vehicles. So that the buses would kind of follow that same pattern. So this kind of gives you an overview of the traffic flow. Again, I said the big advantage is we can control that, and we can tell the buses, we can tell the drivers exactly where they should come and where they should leave from. So there shouldn't be any mixing of buses going up Lockash, up the driveway that's shown in red. The other thing we just wanted to point out, there's about 8 buses that do go to Fort Washington, and we're showing that with the little orange thing right next to the word Fort Washington there. Okay, thank you, Brooke. So that shows you that, just again, to give you an idea of all of the bus traffic in that vicinity. This next chart, we don't need to spend time on it, but what we really wanted to point out is that we've already kind of got an outline of what the timing is for when the drivers arrive, when the buses leave in the morning, the buses then return, and then they got the afternoon runs, and then there's 2 buses that are doing some activity runs in the evening. And so this information will be important as we go, and if we go to the next steps of trying to get approvals through the township and the land development process. So we've already kind of got a handle on that. Next slide, Brooke. So now we're getting to some close-ups, and you can see this is a nice close-up of the site. And you can again see the stormwater basin is highlighted, the wetlands, and all those will not be disturbed, as well as the trees that you see on the bottom of the page and slightly to the right, hugging the baseball field. So all of that will not be disturbed. And now you get a really good picture of the gravel and dirt areas that we're looking to develop the site on. And you see the service drive to the left, there's a white line kind of going right through it. And then the 2 yellow lines you see further to the left are the 309 expressway. All right, and of course the Field of Dreams is labeled for you also up top of the page. Boom, there you go. We finished the project. No, I'm just kidding. So this is sort of how it would look once if it were developed this way. Of course, by the way, this is just a feasibility study and a concept design. So there will be adjustments to this, but we wanted to make sure that it had a best fit and to develop the appropriate budgets, which we'll be covering shortly. We wanted to make sure we had accounted for as many of the things that we possibly think would be required. So you can see the building is tucked to the bottom there. And it what it does, it also further, I think, basically buffers the buses from any activities on the athletic fields here, as well as, of course, from Fort Washington. And then you can see the buses are parked there. Just up from the existing wetlands is where we're proposing the fueling station could be located. Right now, we are looking at a fueling station that would be below ground, but one of the next steps we've outlined is perhaps to do some additional geotechnical investigation to confirm, the underground, rock or any other materials that might ask us to consider putting that above ground. I would like to see if we can put it above ground, but again, space is a little limited here. You can see we've added some trees up against the Field of Dreams just for discussion purposes right now. And we do have a fence line, the black line, a fence line going in there, of course, to number one, secure the bus facility and protect the assets of the buses, but as well to protect balls and everything else from, going into the facility. And then, of course, coming down, there would be a gate adjacent to the building, that black line, Brooke. Yep, perfect. There's a gate there to secure the facility. And then there's a gate up near the batting cages also to secure the facility there. So you could kind of secure that off as we wanted to and open it based on our needs. You can now see where the bus drivers would park right next to the batting cages. And you can see we have all of the van and bus parking outlined there. We have the fueling station. We've checked that the turning radiuses are feasible and we can make it work. So in essence, that's the site plan. The next slide I'm going to go to is going to give you just a quick overview of the building. Oh, these are all the notes. So, for purposes, I've kind of described all this already, but for purposes of posting the presentation, everything is kind of labeled there. I don't think I missed anything in my description, so I think we can jump off that slide. I think everyone got this. So this is the actual building. We did spend a little bit of time making sure we had the right footprint. This project, and you'll see from the budget, it's almost a 50-50, site cost versus building cost, which is not very typical. Most times, of course, the site cost is a small percentage of the building costs, but this building is small, and I can tell you it's very utilitarian. Chris, Andy, and Bob spent a lot of time on this with us, and we've skinnied it down to, as small as we possibly can make this. We've also got it to be a very basic shape, and we can look at some prefabricated structures, and we'll talk to you about that in a minute when we talk about the budget. But essentially, it's 4 garages and 1 meeting space, a couple of offices, and some toilet rooms. That's essentially what the building is. We've sort of highlighted in color some different color codes. Kim helped work on this, and she's highlighted some spaces, and you'll see basically the circulation space is one area of the orange, and that's really kind of the waiting reception area, and then just access to the toilets and the meeting room. It's a very small portion of it, and everything else is very functional. So that's the floor plan. And now I think we get to the good stuff, which is the budget. So what we did, we broke the budget down into into the line items that you're typically used to seeing if we were to go out to bid with this project. So there would be 4 primes, and we've broken it down into a GC, electrical, mechanical, and a plumbing scope. But then we kind of pull the site out because, as I said, you can see the bus facility is at about 2.7 and the site is at 2.9. So like I said, almost half the cost, or over half the cost is really site construction. And that's important to note. And when you see that site plan, you kind of start to realize that there's a lot of utilities that have to be extended here. We have to deal with water, sewer, power, gas we're bringing all to the location. And then for the site, we have to distribute that for the bus facility. We've got site lighting, we've got the fueling station, we've got all of those components in there. And then like we normally do, we've got a soft cost line item. So basically the building and site, if you add it up, it's 2.7 and 2.9, that is at 5.7. Now, we can talk about this maybe with any questions, but construction costs, right now we factored what we believe are based on the construction costs today. And so that's one of the reasons that we're recommending we hold a contingency at this point. For part of it is for inflation and the unknowns, but part of it is because we're very early in design, we're very early in approvals. And so we're recommending once you add the soft cost to the 5.7, you end up with a $6.7 million project. And we're recommending that consideration be given to holding a contingency at this point. And therefore, when you add those all together, it's 7.8. But essentially, the building and site are 5.7. Soft costs are about $1 million. And then about $1 million for contingency. Now, on the right side, we wanted to show you that there's opportunities, I think, already that we've started to look at to bring some savings to this project. So the first building we looked at was a prefabricated metal building. That was our initial reaction, is to go with a prefabricated metal building. The team looked at looking at switching this out to a pole barn. Right now, we think that could extend about a $400,000 savings to the project. Our recommendation is if we move forward to bid this as an alternate, it'll do 2 things, because if we just decide to go with the pole barn, we think those numbers might go up. But if we go with both options, I think we'll add some competition to the mix and make everybody work harder to win the job. And so that could definitely extend about a $400,000 savings. There's some paving that we included because we think once we do this project, we should include that, but it's really not part of the bus garage per se, as the paving at the adjacent to the batting cages. And then there's also the paving for that whole drive, which showed up as a red line. 320,000, we included that as part of the scope again to just complete the project. But those are potential deduct alternates where you could obviously get this project up and running and not necessarily have to do that work if you didn't want to. And then, like I said, an above ground fuel tank, we'd have to work hard to try to make sure we could locate that properly once we get some details, but we might be able to save about 50,000 with that. Some of the other ideas that have been tossed around, I know, and have been discussed, is a possible cost sharing with the township for use of that proposed fueling station. It is in good proximity to their needs, And perhaps if that was an upgraded state-of-the-art fueling station, there may be some benefits for the township sharing in that. And then, of course, that big contingency number, as always, we continue to reduce that as we move forward in the project and find more information, and hopefully we can reduce that number as we move forward also. So that's kind of the budget in a nutshell, summary. The next slide is, of course, with the budget, we always like to give you a timeline. I apologize, I don't know why those staggered over, but it just feels like when we save files, they stagger a little bit. But so there's no purpose to that staggering, so it doesn't mean anything. But essentially, as Andy pointed out, we're on target with our feasibility study. We have given approximately 2 months there to further discuss this and perhaps do some more investigation if the board decides that that's appropriate. And then, you know, really starting in earnest the design in approximately September. And, you know, essentially we're looking at close to a year to get through land development approvals and finish the design all the way through, you know, July of the following year, which would be 2022. And so we would be bidding in about that June, July timeframe. You see the bidding phase there of 2022 with a start in 2022, summer of 2022, and then finishing essentially a year later, the following July of 2023. So unfortunately, the approvals do take close to a year, and the construction takes close to a year. In a nutshell, there is a lot of work, and the approvals, it is a full NPDS permit, a full site plan submission, and I know you guys are somewhat familiar with those processes and how long they take. So that's the timeline. And then, as Andy had said in the introduction, I just wanted to frame out for you some of the next steps that you could consider if you decided to proceed with this. So obviously the first would be to receive comments and any revisions to the draft study. And of course, that's subject to the board and the district's input. We would then had talked about this as part of our early planning is, you know, whether we should then entertain some discussion of the plan with the township, which would be one of the major approval agencies required to approve the plan, and a possible partnership if we wanted to with the fueling station. As I had noted, this is extensive site work. And so we believe if we're proceeding forward, there should be some additional geotechnical investigations at the building, at the fuel station, and for stormwater and utilities. We should do a little bit more on that. And then more formally, we may want to actually make a formal sketch plan submission and you know, look at the land development requirements with the township. And with all of that, once we're done with that, we could kind of get to the September stage if that's where we decided to go. And then, you know, the study and the budget would be approved and authorized at that point to proceed with actual design. So that's sort of the next steps we think that should be considered if you want to move ahead. And I think I did pretty good there with time. So we'll open it up to questions, Mr. Sirota.
All right, thanks, Arif, for the update and the presentation. I do have a couple of questions, and I'm sure other members do too. Feel free to raise your hands if you have something you want to say or ask. In the meantime, Arif, so there are a couple questions I have. One is, I know that this original site was part of the high school project. In fact, the reason we have those gravel areas now is because it was a temporary parking area during the high school project that was later to be developed into a transportation facility that ended up getting delayed out of the core high school project. But for that reason, wasn't land or some amount of land development already done for this project at that time? And what has been done? Are we starting from scratch completely as though it were just bare land, or did we get any benefit out of whatever was done back then?
No, that's a great question. So the actual design submissions did not do any specific design or anything related to the bus facility. There's no, you know, it was talked about that this area is being reserved for a bus facility. And like I said, I know there's some capacity in the storm basin, but that's
Right. I
about
mean,
it.
there drainage has already been done there around the perimeter.
Yes, there's some drainage. I think with our layout, you know, there's going to have to be some adjustments to that, and we're going to have to, of course, have to add new storm drainage and everything else to capture the water and direct it into there. But you know, other than that, there really isn't any specific infrastructure or any specific approvals that we could, you know, capitalize on at this point. You know, we know that it's approved for a bus facility. I did do some initial research on the land development zoning that the team has looked at, and there are some things there that would have to be addressed. And we can talk about that at a subsequent meeting. There are some things that we'd have to address. So none of those variances or other things were proceeded with at the time.
Okay. And I know there are a number of other concerns that I don't see addressed, at least in the presentation here, that I believe we passed along from the community, including things like emissions from the buses and their effect on the elementary school nearby. Is there an opportunity between now and whenever we consider a final approval to, you know, so you suggest a geotechnical investigation, but I don't see any suggestion for doing any emission studies. I don't know whether that's surveying the existing research or actually doing measurements of existing. So I don't know what that would mean exactly, but I see nothing about it at all. And so I think it's a question we need to address before we can move forward.
Yeah, so there, you know, we did not include in our scope any air quality testing. I think Brooke, if you go to the slide that showed the traffic flow, I think it's slide, it had the lines, the colored lines on it. It's further down there. Yep, that one. You got it, number 10. Thank you. If you click on that. So, Mr. Sirota, if you look, what I tried to point out with the, you know, I know this question of the emissions. I'm not sure even how you would do that. Now, we could do some research. I'm not an expert on emissions testing for vehicles and air quality testing outside. You know, we've done enough of it inside buildings, but exterior, I guess, you know, if that's what the board wants, you know, we could work with the administration and see what, who we could engage to try to get us some data. But essentially, you know, there's no buses there now. And I was showing you like where the buses park in front of a school anytime they go to pick up. And we never really do emissions testing on that. So I'm not sure how we would address that question when you look at where the buses would be with the yellow and orangish colors that I'm showing you relative to, you know, a student at the Fort Washington Elementary School, I'm assuming, and also the impact of 309 being right there. So again, I'm not an expert at that, but this is something that I think is going to be difficult to come up with a program to address that. But again, we can certainly do that if that's the direction of the board, is work with the administration and see who has done something like that or what is out there to help with that. But unfortunately, every school we build, I know there's high schools where there's 30 buses parked there in front of, you know, the high school, the entrances, and HVAC units are on the roof, and the unit ventilator openings are there. And I've never heard of a study or any investigation done on that. But it's a great question. I just don't have an answer, and it wasn't part of our study to do.
Okay. The other comment I just wanted to make, if you go down one slide, Brooke, to the traffic flow. Sorry, to the traffic counts. Yeah. I'm just slightly, it looks like there's more vehicles arriving than are leaving. You know, it seems to be a little bit Hotel California here. And I just want, those don't appear to be complete numbers. So I just, not that we need to have complete numbers right at this moment. But I just want to make sure we have a complete count somewhere. Maybe it's just the presentation, and the actual report would have more detail.
It's a good question, but I think the first one is drivers. I apologize. You know, it's actually cars coming, and I think some of them are, you know, the mechanics and stuff. So is that what you mean?
Well,
Or-
I see 56 cars arrive, another 41 cars arrive, and then finally 39 cars leave. For example.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So what happens is the bus drivers return after the morning run in that 8 to 9:15. And it's obvious at some point when they come, you know, they're leaving
Yeah.
with cars and going away.
Yeah.
And why that's off by one, I think one of them maybe stays behind or something.
Well, I mean, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's off by one or something. It's not, I don't
It's
know.
not just the count, it's also the direction, but that's okay. I mean, I don't think we need to have a final detail on this. I'm going to pass it to Jen next. Go ahead, Jen.
Okay, I have a couple questions.
Sure.
So would this affect or impact the parking at Field of Dreams at all? Or would it like maybe make it better, make it worse?
It won't make it better. I don't say it will make it better, because right now what's happening, if you go again, Brooke, to the one that had the traffic flow, or any one of them actually, site plans, I apologize. Like somewhere in number 12, yeah, there, that's fine, that's good enough. So, so really right now, as you well know, they park in front of the batting cages, but some people actually park where the one orange line is, like, you know, just off in that gravel area, which I don't, it's really, so, but there is, we believe there's enough parking there, and that whole red line, you know, at any given time, there should be enough parking. And then in the evening, where we're having the bus drivers park right by the batting cages, that whole area then won't, they'll be gone, as you can see from the evening activities. So that whole parking will be there. So I don't think it makes it any worse. Only part is they won't be able to park within the caged, the fenced area where the buses and the vans are. We are going to have to restrict that. But all of the other parking that's there in that long red line, as well as in front of the batting cages there, that'll all still be there. We could probably, you know, we'd have to talk to Chris, but, you know, they could even park, you know, around the maintenance facility. There's some parking spaces there, because in the evening, those guys are gone. So we have some parking there. So I don't think it makes it any worse. The only part is they won't be able to park right in that gravel area by the Field of Dreams. So I think in the evening, I don't see a parking issue. You know, they won't be able to park right by the Field of Dreams like they probably do now and pull out their beach chair and, you know, sit there or whatever they do. So, so that will change a little bit. Does that help?
Yeah, that helps. Okay, I have another question. The service drive, who, like right now it's being used because of the pandemic for pickups at Fort Washington. Who owns, like, who owns the service drive? Is it the township, or how does that work? I don't, is it a driveway? Is it an alley? I don't know what, like, technically it is.
It's a service drive made for the, it was put in there for the garbage trucks and all of the township, you know, public works built trucks to come in and out of from there. I don't know who put it in, but I think it was put in when a 309 went in, and it was probably some discussion between the township and how it was put in. And it is a service drive, a public service drive that I believe, I haven't checked into the easements, but I believe that the town, the school district would have rights to access for this facility. And again, those are some of the things that would get worked out through the land development process. But
Right, Arif, we do need to answer that question for sure, but my understanding is the drive was actually built as part of the 309 construction project. When it was built by PennDOT with the understanding that it would be used by the township. However, I believe it's actually on school district property, and we gave them an easement for it at the time.
Okay.
But I could be wrong, and we'll need to verify all that.
Right, but I think in the bottom line is I think we have access to it, and it is a service drive for, you know, trucks.
Okay. And how many, I heard you say 45 drivers. Is that how many buses we have? 45 buses? Or is it 45 employees?
If you go back to the Chris can answer.
So Reef, yeah, Chris is on. Chris, are you able to jump on and answer that?
Yeah, so the number on the slide, number looks
11.
like 11. So that number 56, that includes the grounds staff, all of the drivers, mechanics, office staff, and the educational assistants that that ride on our special needs buses.
Okay, so how many buses would we be parking back there? Do we,
So we have 41 buses
okay,
and 9 vans.
okay. Okay, and then, do we know that, there was mention of the township using the fueling facility? Do we have any idea how many vehicles they have?
Not off the top of my head, but I can tell you that a fueling facility like this with dispensers on both sides would easily accommodate them, and if they needed to be a little bit of scheduling, depending when, Chris targets fueling for the buses, I think it would not be an issue. But if I were to guess, I think they might have 15 or so vehicles. I'm not, again, that's a guess.
Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, Amy, go ahead.
Thanks. Just wanted to go back to the pole barn concept that you introduced tonight, Arif. You had mentioned a timeline, well, a potential savings for going that route if we decided, but is that going to potentially impact the timeline in a positive way as well if we went that route?
No, the timeline would stay the same. The construction of whether it's the metal building or the approval and the construction of them would almost be about the same timeline. You still have to have the same approvals, and from an execution standpoint, they both need foundations and then erection time. I don't see a significant, pickup in time, if that's what your question is. And I also just want to clarify and correct myself. When I talked about the township, I was referring more to like dump trucks and heavy duty trucks. I think they may want, I don't know what they're going to do with their police vehicles. I wasn't referring to police vehicles and all the other service vehicles. There's obviously a number of those as well. Okay. But does that answer the question? Sorry, the timing thing, did I get that right? Okay. Yeah.
Yes, thanks.
Okay, Jeff.
Thanks, Mark. Arif, couple questions that I had. Staying on those trucks, you stated that like dump trucks and trash trucks, for example, use that service road currently. Did we look at the frequency of the usage of that service road? Do you know what that is?
No, that's a good question. And again, like I said, those are all the next steps that would get into if we decided to proceed with approvals. And that's why there is a lot of legwork that we have to coordinate with the township. And that's why my suggestion was, if we're interested, the next step would be to have some preliminary discussions with them and then do some sketch plan submissions. And I think some of these things would start to get come to the surface and we could address them.
Okay. On that point, I know we've been talking a little bit about land development. I think at one point you said that you discussed the land development requirements with the township. Do we, as we sit here today, know what those are?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, we've been through land development. Every municipality almost has similar land development requirements. I mean, when you do land development, there's multiple steps. So, and there's multiple agencies. Of course, one big agency is the Montgomery County Conservation District, which issues the NPDES permit. And that's part of the land development process also. So it's not just the township. And then depending on the road access and where we are, sometimes you get involved in PennDOT. We'd also be dealing with all of the utility providers through that process. But the actual township process is pretty cut and dry. They have a SALDO, which is a subdivision and land development ordinance that's required by the Pennsylvania Municipalities Planning Code. It's a requirement. And they have certain timelines where you have to submit the sketch plan. Once you do a sketch plan, then they have certain planning agency reviews. They have staff reviews, engineer reviews, and you get comments back. Then you go to the planning commission meeting, get those comments. Then you go to preliminary plan, and then finally go to final plan. So all of those steps, and within it, they have tree commissions and they have other different agencies that have to do reviews. So kind of, it's a pretty well-defined process, but it takes a lot of time. And some of those other approval agencies have to also interact in between that.
Sure, understood. Appreciated. That explanation is helpful. So the costs of that process is already built into the budget estimate that you provided for us?
Yes, that's considered a soft cost. And
Soft cost.
Category, that would be all of the design fees, the approval agency review fees, as well as there's a small line item for furniture and equipment that would go in here, very small for this facility. There's numbers for construction testing. There's numbers for some of that investigation that we talked about. There's fees for all of the design professionals, all of that. Yep, in the soft cost.
In the soft cost. Okay, great. Appreciate that. The contingency, you talked a little bit about that. I think you've got like 1.1 million in for a contingency, which, just doing the math on the construction costs, it's about 19.5%, give or take, somewhere in there. It jumps out at me as being a relatively large percentage. I mean, I'm not a construction professional, but I dabble in that arena. And I guess I wanted to understand a little bit better from you. Is that all anticipated construction inflation, or what in your head is driving that 19.5% contingency?
Right. So if you look at the site improvements, we have basically put in the minimal amount of site improvements that we believe are required. And again, this is a very high level concept budget. So we don't have every storm pipe size. We don't know exactly what we're going to run into to extend water and sewer there, gas. We don't have any of that information. And this project is very, very heavy on site. So to answer your question, I don't think we need a lot of contingency on the building. If we're talking the building cost, I would probably be at 10% on the building cost right now at this early stage. Once we actually receive bids, we might lower it. But again, the problem is this project is so small and the variables and all of the scope is just as large as if it was a $40 or $50 million project, right? So that's the problem. We're touching so many different components and the site work is so heavy on this one that I just felt at this early stage, with all of the variables and pricing that's out there, with all of the unknowns, with the subsurface conditions, the approvals, and just the type of project it is, we felt like that contingency should be considered. Andy and I had a lot of discussions about this, and I would be willing to consider, reducing that a little if we take some of these other steps that we've outlined. I think it would be wise to reduce it a little bit. But I don't think at this early stage to have a 20% contingency for this type of project is completely unreasonable. I would agree with you. Normally, it should be more closer to 10%. But if you were dealing with a $40 million project, we'd have a $4 million contingency, right? So, that's the problem. I mean, to give you an example, we're in bidding. Once we receive bids at Sandy Run, we're carrying a $2 million contingency on Sandy Run Middle School. And even that, I think we're at the point now where we could consider reducing that. Andy and I have talked about that. But again, we have a big portion of that. Once we tear the building down, we know that there's some big caissons under that building. And those all have to come out, and we're putting an athletic field and all of those. So because of that, I still feel like there's still a big variable that we don't know on that, because typically you'd say, oh my God, the building's out of the ground, why are we holding that contingency? But then if you think about that piece, so sure. I do agree with you. I think the contingency is on the high end, but the variables I think are significant here yet that we don't know.
Okay, I very much appreciate it. Thank you for that. And I guess, and you sort of alluded to this, is there a possibility that additional, I'll call it feasibility work for lack of a better phrase, could work to lessen that contingency out of the box? Meaning if there was either geotechnical analysis or further analysis of land issues, is that something where there's value in probing that up front because that will tell us more what the ultimate cost will be? Does that question make sense?
Well, I don't think, I think we're pretty good with our cost numbers, but we could definitely reduce the contingency. Yes. So, and
Yeah,
if
no,
you
I
look-
meant the contingency, not the construction cost. Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. And if you look at our next steps, I think some of those, if you were to initiate some of those, including getting through sketch plan and doing some of that geotechnical, I think we can then intelligently talk about bringing that down by a couple $100,000, dollars.
Okay. Okay.
For sure.
Just a couple more, and then I'll pass it to my my fellow board members. I apologize if I'm usurping people's times. You talked about a fence, and I know we're not in the design stage, but what kind of fence are we talking about? Like how high? What kind of fence? Is that something you think about now in terms of feasibility, or is that more of a design issue?
Well, for cost purposes, we have already thought about it. I think, I would recommend, we didn't really outline it completely as the design team, but, typically I would like to see like an 8-foot high fence. It would be a chain link. Should it be black, vinyl coated? Those are all the details that have to be worked out. But in that range of 8 feet, maybe you can get away with 6 feet fence. I don't think it wants to be a 4 or 5 foot fence, because otherwise I think it defeats the purpose of having it, because really you're protecting the assets of the buses essentially.
Sure.
From potential vandalism, I think. I mean, most transportation facilities we've dealt with are about an 8-foot fence. Some have gone higher and some get crazy with stuff on top of it, but I don't think we're there in this community.
Okay. Kind of along those same lines, the trees you were talking about, you talked about that clump of trees, and you talked about some ideas for additional landscaping or buffers in various parts. That existing tree clump, is any of that additional landscaping in that area, or is that all in new areas of landscaping?
No, I would leave that pretty much the way it is. If we had to clean up a little bit, that's fine, but I would leave that alone. I don't want to disturb more area from a cost standpoint. I want to stay out of areas we don't need to disturb unless there's a specific purpose. I'm talking about something up against the field of greens, something up against, the batting cages, that area up against the wetlands, some of those type of areas to make it look, protect everybody from the fencing and,
Sure.
stark nature of all that blacktop there.
Okay. And there's no issue with landscaping on wetlands? I mean, I know we can't build there, but we're able to landscape there as part of a project?
Adjacent, we will not be touching the wetlands unless
Adjacent
we
to it.
absolutely have to. Yeah, right next to it, yeah.
Okay. Okay. And one more, and I promise then I'll stop for a while. Mr. Surratt had asked you some questions about the like emissions and study, and you talked about there potentially getting somebody to engage there. Have we done so far like any type of, I know we didn't do a study, but any type of like literature review of anything that is out there? I don't know if that's something you guys looked at, but is that something that you would also think about exploring as a next step in that area as well?
Yeah, by the way, all these are fantastic questions. So they're really great and they help us a lot. So thank you. But
no pride in authorship. We're working together. Appreciate it.
right. But the emissions one, I'm going to have to say I am definitely not qualified to address the emissions thing. All I can tell you is this, we have buses parked in front of schools all over the place. And they're idling there right in front of the doors and the windows of schools everywhere.
Sure.
And so I don't know of any studies that are done, and I don't really know how you would do one. So that's one I think Chris and the administrative team, Andy and I, can get together and talk about, what's out there and what we can try to pull together. But I really, Jeff, I don't have much to offer on that.
Fair enough. Appreciate it, Arif. Next person up.
Art.
I have 2 questions about the building itself slide. I guess is it 13, Brooke?
Yes.
I just want to make sure which which way do the doors open for the buses that go in? I'm assuming that it is on top, that's further away from Fort Washington.
That is correct.
Okay, and then I'm also questioning, I guess there's 4 bays that you're proposing. Currently, how many bays do we have in our, I'll be polite and call it transportation center?
I'll let Chris, why don't
Chris?
you're still there. Do you want to take that one?
Yeah. So if you measured what we have there space wise, we have about 3.5 bays on the transportation side and about 2.5 bays for the ground side. So this is a more reasonable layout for us to be able to do what we need to do. We have a lot of unused space at our current facility inside.
Right, and in your opinion, I mean, we're showing the 4 bays. That's really what we need. We couldn't save some additional funding by going with 3 because of grounds and all the other vehicles that we also have to service.
That is correct.
Okay. Okay. That's it. Thanks.
All right, thanks. Darlene, I saw your hand up earlier. Did you have something that?
Well, I can go ahead and ask. I mean, most of my questions were already asked and answered. I was just wondering one final thing regarding the service road. And obviously, right now, the township primarily utilizes it. If indeed this project were to go forward and we had our buses using it as well, whose responsibility is it to maintain that road?
That's actually a very excellent question. And again, I think that would all have to come out of the land development. And another reason for the contingency would be, I think there would be some work required to that road that we currently do not have in there, and that would come out of contingency. So these are all the type of questions. You guys are asking really good questions. And that's why this is basically a feasibility study. We haven't gotten into those details, but it's a great question. I think there would be some work have to be done, and then there would be discussions on maintenance of it moving forward. But right now, I believe it's really on the township at this point because we barely use the road. But at this point, I think that would be a discussion point as well because we'd have considerable traffic on it as well.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent point. And that's
Right,
Jeff.
okay.
Jeff's contingency there. Question that helps frame why I think there's some contingency there that, because that could be a big line item just by itself.
Right, I'm just to follow up to that and thinking back to our conversations in 2018 about this when we were considering a joint project with the township. This would all have to be part of the negotiation of how we're sharing a fuel station, potentially how we're sharing that road. I mean, if I'm correct that we own the property and I've granted an easement for their use, then we have to go back and revisit that and see exactly what that says and what the terms are, et cetera. So I just want to summarize, Arif. So this was a feasibility study. The final answer is that yes, it's feasible at the following estimated costs, which are higher than we were hoping. Andy, I want to just clarify that even if this turns out to be even if we went forward and did this project and it turned out to be about this amount, we're still talking about an annual savings. It would just take longer to pay off than if it were the original $5 million estimate. Is that fair?
That's a fair point, yes.
Yeah, okay. I did have a question about the traffic flow. Now, I know the afternoon runs, pretty much all the buses, when they leave this facility, they're going to the far side of the high school, to the cafeteria side in order to pick up students. And it seems like it would be prudent for them to go straight across Loch Alsh to Spark Drive. Of course, that's not where the driveway is on the township side, and we don't own that property right now. So that's another potential point of negotiation with the township. If we thought it was better, instead of sending them all the way around Fort Washington Avenue, we could send them straight across. But we would have to revise the driveway on that side. Was that considered at all, Arif, or because that's township property, it wasn't a consideration?
No, currently we're just planning it as shown there with the yellow
Yeah.
and orange, yeah. We
Okay.
did not have any discussions with the township, yes.
And last question, so I understand that the assessment is that it will fit, but it's tight. Is that, I mean, it fits comfortably? Is there room to grow if we end up with, instead of, now we have 41 buses and 9 vans, if 10 years from now we have 45 buses and 12 vans, is that, is there room for that?
So that's a really good question. So really right now we're actually showing 23. So right now we're showing just about, we actually have a little extra room because we've got 23 mini bus van parking, and we have 34 bus parking shown. And then there is room around the building too. So Chris, exactly, I know we didn't get into the details. I mean, if to answer Mark's question, the big buses versus the mini vans, do we have that number? I apologize, I don't have that.
I don't have it off the top of my head. I'm going to say we have 9 vans, 9 mini buses, and 32 full-size buses.
So right now, Mark, we are showing 35 big buses and 23, mini bus / van parking spaces. So I think we have some room, but not a tremendous amount. And we haven't yet capitalized on these. You can go to a blow up one, which is maybe number 12. So, we haven't capitalized, you can't see my arrow, but see where it says proposed landscape buffer? There's all this asphalt here, there's room here. There could be some parallel parking. There's parking around the building. Sometimes I'm sure some buses are actually at the building and not in their slots. So I think there's room, Mark, but you can see if we're going to respect the buffers and the field and everything else around it, there's not much more blacktop. We can always go back.
And just to clarify for everyone, I'm not anticipating this will happen. When we looked at our enrollment numbers, we don't see them, expanding in the foreseeable future to any significant degree. I just, thinking about, are we boxed in if that ever were to happen? So I don't want to, put anyone's mind thinking, oh no, we need bigger counts than that. But
yeah, I think we have a little flexibility, Mark. 3 to 5 buses more, and
yeah,
I don't think we need more van parking. It seems like we got plenty of that. Do we pull one of those away? Part of it is we just got to get this turning radius, and the big thing is the turning radiuses
right.
For the fueling station, but.
And the fueling station, if we do it just ourselves or we do it with the township, that doesn't affect the size, especially if it's underground, that doesn't affect the size of anything, right? It just would be refilled more often if necessary. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's the way we've seen it right now. Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Any other comments or questions for Arif? All right, so let's talk about next steps. Brooke, can you bring us to the next step slide, please? So I think at this point, this is a preliminary presentation. Is there also a written document to go a more complete document, or is this what we have?
We'll put it in writing,
Okay.
but essentially going to have there'll be no really extra content that will be of significance. It's going to be basically what you see, but
okay,
we'll get it in writing.
So I think the number is higher, obviously, than we were hoping it would be, and I understand that part of that is just the timing of things right now. But given that the number is higher, it does introduce questions about the relative cost to other locations and that kind of thing that I'm sure are likely to come up in community input later tonight. So it would be great if the numbers could be broken down in a way that shows us, which things, I mean, I know that site development costs are in some measure different on every site. But if we're not saving anything because the site was partially developed, does it indicate that, this cost to build on this site, if we found another 2.5 acres somewhere else, it's approximately the same cost to build somewhere else? Is a question we're going to want to be able to answer, because I know it's going to be asked by our community. To buy 2.5 acres somewhere else, I know, it's going to cost us whatever the cost of 2.5 acres is right now, which is, not insignificant.
Well, I think you're going to need more than 2.5 acres, depending where you get it. But the big advantage that you have here is we've just talked about the bus parking, the bus driver parking. So
that's right. That's not included in my 2.5 acres. Yeah.
We didn't develop that. We don't have to develop that. We don't have to, although we've talked about these driveways and entrances and perhaps, rebuilding them a little bit or overlaying, mill and overlay, whatever has to be done. That infrastructure, depending what site you pick, you have to worry about that. The utilities here are all at Fort Washington, and so we can come across our property there and basically serve our building with everything from gas to water and sewer and power. So those are some of the things that you'd have to worry about. And then, of course, the fact that you have to purchase the land, like you said. But I don't think from a blank slate of paper, other than those variables, and they could be significant. Like if you got to build a parking lot for 45 bus drivers, that's a big cost. And then those driveways marked. But this project, like I said, in the site, there's almost $1.2 million in paving, just blacktop.
Yeah.
And that site number, just to give you an idea, is a lot that you see it on that plan. That's a lot of blacktop, and it's got to be heavy duty because we've got buses on it.
Okay. So I think right now in your scope, there's no additional work we're waiting for, unless we charter geotechnical investigations or emissions investigations. There is discussion about whether we should move forward with the township now. And I guess the value in doing that would be to find out whether there's additional roadblocks that we might not be aware of, as well as to pursue potential cost sharing areas. Do you see any downside to doing that sooner rather than later?
No, in our proposal, we had recommended that as an option. And so I
Yeah.
always think more information and knowing upfront where you're going before you start going there is always better. And, getting everybody on board is always better than finding out later that there are other variables and factors that you have to consider in order to get through the approval. So I think knowing it upfront or sooner is better.
Okay. So members of the committee, and I guess I'll also put this to Dr. Yanni and Mr. Leckman, is your inclination to at least do some of those preliminary investigations, either on geotechnical or discussions with the township now, or would you rather pursue other options before we head that direction?
I prefer moving forward now.
Okay.
I agree with Mike. I think we should just move forward now.
Okay, and to be clear, just for everyone's sake, moving forward doesn't mean committing to doing this. It means additional investigation on whether doing this is
Correct.
sensible.
Correct.
Andy or Steve, did you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think, there's some open questions and a lot of what was already addressed tonight. I think the geotechnical is important to address some of those, especially the contingency there that we're unsure. And there's some items that we need to work out with the township beyond just land development, is open up discussions with the township about potential sharing and what that looks like. So I think those make a lot of sense to do as a next step.
I agree with what Andy said in terms of the township. I think we have to have a good idea of what it is that the township is going to require and want as a result of this project, if this project gets to the point of happening at this proposed site.
Okay, Darlene, I didn't
Yeah.
just,
Yeah, I was getting ready to jump in. I agree with what everyone else has said. I think we do need more information. I think we need to have those conversations with the township because I think that will help us, decide what direction we want to go before we start looking at other options outside of this site.
right, and to be clear, those other options outside of the site, it's not that we're blind to them. But in the investigations we have so far, the other options we have are to continue where we are, or to find some land somewhere. And when we have searched for land in the past, we have come up short. It's not to say we wouldn't come up short if we tried again. But we don't have those options. We're not aware of options at the moment. So I think the next steps I hear, then we move forward with the township. We move forward with the geotechnical investigation. I would strongly recommend that we at least figure out how to answer the question about, I'm not sure saying we answer it, but how do we answer the question about the emissions impact? I mean, I think part of this is, I know I've reviewed existing studies regarding emissions near highways that talk about things like prevailing wind direction and the distance that particulate matter carries. And there is a difference between diesel and gas. Diesel produces soot. We're moving away from diesel over time. Gas, produces different things that don't settle in the way that soot settles, which are worse for the upper atmosphere, but better for the lower atmosphere. So there's all kinds of types of people that might be the right people to ask about this. And I think we need some guidance on where to move forward with that. And so I think I would charter the administration, and maybe it's Arif. You're an engineer, you're figuring out how to solve these problems, answer these questions, is at least figuring it out how to answer it is in your wheelhouse. I think we can pursue that. And I think it's important to pursue it. Any other comments?
Yeah, one other thing, Mr. Sirota, I truly believe when we do the assessment of the impact of additional 45 buses in that area, we should also take into account the traffic volume on 309. The last time I checked it out, I believe, now this was pre-COVID, it was about the PennDOT stated on their website that 309 has an average, again, pre-COVID, of like 70,000 vehicles a week traveling up and down 309, where the high school and Fort Washington Elementary School is right next to. So I'm wondering if, even if that's cut by, down to 30%, that's still, 20,000 vehicles or something like that. And, what's going to be the impact of an additional 45 buses, whatever assessment or analysis that we receive, we definitely need to look at, take into account that both Fort Washington Elementary School and the high school are sitting less than 100 meters away from 309 with a pretty huge traffic load already. Thank you.
So is that enough for marching orders from the committee, or some of that I know it's going to require some board action. I'm not sure if it would be Monday or a month from now. But to charter a geotechnical investigation is not something we can just wave our hands and do.
Yeah, I think I can talk with Arif, and I think we have enough marching order to potentially get something on the agenda for Monday night. So we'll look into it, and worst case scenario is we just move forward in August. So we'll see what we can get done by Monday night.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Let's thank you, Arif, for coming, and appreciate the update. And we'll look forward to those next steps. It sounds like we won't be making a decision until late summer or early fall at the earliest. But and it may be later than that, depending on how things go. All right, moving on, next up is announcements. Mr. Leckman, do we have any announcements?
I do not have any this evening.
All right, thank you. We do have minutes from our May 13th meeting. We've all had an opportunity to review those. Are members of the committee prepared to accept those minutes?
Yes.
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 All right, thank you. So those will appear on the legislative agenda as an informational item. And moving on, let's see, we're on to the reports and recommendations. So we have the Sandy Run update, and I understand since Arif is here, he'll be taking that one.
Yeah, I'm gonna let Zach, who's sitting right next to me, we actually matched.
All right, Zach.
Something like that. So Zach's here. So I'll let him do it because you get firsthand knowledge from the guy on the ground.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to provide you with a live update. Should be a little bit more exciting than what's in the monthly report, I hope. I do understand you have a lot on your agenda tonight, so I'm going to go through this quickly and we'll take questions at the end. So Brooke, if we could go to the first slide. On there, just a couple of bullet points. The roof on the entire building is finished. Now there's some detail work, there's some edge coping, things like that, but the roof on the entire building is done. Both the interior CMU, the concrete masonry walls, as well as the exterior brick, those are both going to finish up within the next 4 weeks. There are 3 site retaining walls. Those were not scheduled to complete until September on our phasing plan, but we will be able to complete all 3 of those by the end of the month of July. There's a lot of extensive finish work going in the classroom wings. We've got flooring, painting, casework, and ceiling grid has been installed in those areas. Permanent power is underway. As of next week, we should have all the wire needed to pull our feeders for the panels. And I did meet last Friday with Andy Leckman and Bob Lester about some traffic pattern ideas for parking teachers and staff next year. And I did meet with our civil engineer of record this afternoon before this meeting. So we do have some plans in the works that we will be proposing very shortly. Next slide, please. It's just an overall site view. You can see that the campus appears to be getting larger. And we'll flip to the next slide. Spend a minute or two on this one. On the left-hand side, that is going to be your main entrance. So what we're doing is we're working extensively to continue to get the building enclosed. We are installing curtain walls on the exterior almost daily. And when we are not, they are, if you look at the picture on the right, there's quite a bit of glass inside that's getting installed. That happens to be the library there. And you can see you've already got the plywood in the back for some acoustic wood panels. And if you look up to the ceiling, that's going to be actually an acoustical plaster ceiling to help keep the noise down in the library. Next slide. 2 very important features of the building are beginning to take shape. We did procure some material as quickly as we could during COVID. So all of the electrical switch gear is in the left-hand side, and that room continues to be built. And if you look to the slide on the right, you can see all of the mechanical housekeeping pads have been completed. There's some expansion tanks that are in the back there. Air separators hanging from the ceiling. All of our pumps are already on site and in that room, as well as the 2 domestic hot water heaters are already on site. So those 2 major components of the building are beginning to take shape. Next slide, please. That might be a little tough to read there, but just this was our milestone schedule. And I just wanted to go over a couple of the items that are completed on time. The electrical duct bank has been completed from the switchgear all the way underground to the building. The emergency generator has been set. As of today, the electrical transformer has been set. So that's a major component that we didn't plan on having this early, especially with COVID. So that's going to hugely benefit the project in getting permanent power earlier than we had originally scheduled. One of the line items on there that's already been completed is the sanitary grease trap, the sanitary grease interceptor. All of that's been set. And again, I did mention that the 3 retaining walls that were not to complete until the end of September, we will have an opportunity to complete those in the month of July. So the next slide is some actual building dates on there. We do have the building watertight with the exception of some vertical openings or windows rather. There's a large area around the cafeteria that gets curtain wall that is not enclosed, and that we're actually doing that on purpose because the auditorium, which is in the center of the building, we need to keep out some space to move large equipment, large lifts in and out of that auditorium. So we decided to pick the cafeteria for that reason, because it's such a wide open space that it's not going to affect any other trades, leaving that area open. But in the classroom wing, the mechanical, electrical, plumbing, above ceiling has all been completed. We've done above ceiling punch lists on both the ground floor as well as the first floor. There's continuing electrical and in-wall plumbing inspections by the township. And also on there, we have a date for flooring that is underway currently. And the permanent power is the last one, the last arrow on there I have, and that's not until December 23rd. Being that the electrical underground has been completed, being that we got the transformer set as early as today, and we're going to have that wire on site next week, we'll be able to start pulling wire for permanent power as early as July, which is going to give us an opportunity to beat that December date. And getting permanent power to the building early is only going to benefit all trades and the overall project. So the next slide shows us the rooftop units getting set. There you can see 2 photos of those getting set. And so all of the rooftop units, with the exception of the 2 chillers that are coming in July, all the rooftop units have been set. And again, we procured material early due to COVID, and it had really benefited this project in particular because with the rooftop units set, the piping underneath of the roof can all be completed, which gives everybody an opportunity to start putting the ceilings together and completing finishes. So we're at a very good point in the project. The next slide just shows some 2 drone shots of the overall building. You can see the rooftop units I just mentioned. Those are all on the roof and within the screen walls and mechanical areas. And you can see that the roofing has completed in its entirety. So moving on to the next slide, that was all a lot of good news, but our quality control is still constantly ongoing. We have a series of different exterior finishes. We have metal panels on this project, as well as brick. And you can see the blue skin, that's the waterproofing agent, and it's correctly tied into the flashing beneath it. So these are just things that we're constantly overseeing to make sure that they're done correctly. The slide on the right is just more continuous inspections that we do to make sure there's no leaks, everything's holding proper pressure, and we very much have the township involved in all of those inspections. So the next slide is a nice shot of the auditorium, and this photo was taken a few weeks ago, so we have since gotten a lot of drywall on both sides of the auditorium, but I took this because it's some pretty impressive framing in that auditorium. In the essence of time, we'll move on to the next slide and we'll just show some classroom finishes. As you can see, the casework's installed, countertops installed, faucets, flooring is there. The picture on the right happens to be the art room. So you have some special lighting hanging from that ceiling. And as you can see, the ceiling grid is in, and all of the above ceiling work above that has been completed on both the ground floor and the first floor. The next slide gives us an opportunity to look at the corridors outside the classroom. And here you can see the ceiling grid and the work above it is complete, and a lot of tile work down that corridor. So things are progressing in the classroom wing relatively quickly. The next slide was just a LEED scorecard, and we're currently on track for LEED Gold. Aramark, your commissioning agent, has been on site regularly. He's checking the building envelope, MEP, mechanical, electrical, plumbing. And I have a meeting set up with Breslin Architects next week just to continuously go over this card and make sure that with this new version of LEED that we are going to be continuing on the right track and able to hit LEED Gold. Next slide. Along with quality control, we're constantly managing costs. So I just wanted to point out here, if you look at the change orders to date, we actually have more money than you started with, which is a good thing. And the remaining material allowance is at 85%. So we are more than 50% of complete with the building, and we still have only spent about 15% of that contingency. So from a budget and a cost standpoint, the job is in a very good place. And on my second to last slide is just a few notes. As we said a few times, the long lead time items, we were able to get those early in some fear of some COVID delays, but that did work out for us. Like I said, the elevator is going to be on site next week. The electrical transformer has been set already. We have all of our plumbing fixtures on site. And I did mention a number of the mechanical equipment in the mechanical room, boilers and hot water heaters are there. And the kitchen equipment's going to be set in the fall. So we're on schedule for that. The site is in good condition. And I did want to point out that we did miss a building watertight milestone date, but with some strategic planning and some minimal overtime, we were able to really mitigate that impact on the schedule. So I'm telling you tonight, the project is in a good place, both financially and schedule-wise. And currently, we got about 100 workers on site every day. That's going to die down a little bit now that the roof has been complete. And like I said, next month, we're going to have many less masons there because the exterior brick and the interior CMU walls will be completed. So on to the final slide is just open it up to questions.
All right, thanks very much, Zach. My main observation is you're normally very, very careful about talking about any places where we're ahead of schedule, and you were much more open with that. So that gives me a lot of optimism in terms of schedule and budget for that matter. Any comments or questions from the rest of the committee or the board?
I just wanted to.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to say, Zach, you and your team are doing a fantastic job. I jog by the site 2 or 3 times a week because I live right up the hill. I never see anyone on your team lagging. Everyone is focused, working diligently. It's a professional operation. In my business life, I've led quite a few capital projects, and by far this is one of the best ones that I've seen. So again, fantastic job. Please just keep it up, keep it going, and we appreciate all you're doing for us. Thank you.
Very glad to hear that. Thank you. I will say that both Andy and Bob have been extremely helpful with getting us information in a timely fashion to keep the project moving. Thanks again.
Stan.
Yeah. Do you have any air circulating fans or temporary air conditioning units? I know in the wintertime you have temporary heating, but do you have any temporary fans to circulate the air within the building to keep the workers comfortable?
Yes, we do. And it's not that we're not concerned with the contractors, but our bigger concern is all of the casework that's been installed. With the heat and the humidity, there are 6 dehumidifiers on the ground floor, and we've got fans on all 3 floors. We did not have anybody on this particular job that has complained about dirty conditions or the building being too hot. So keeping your assets, like the casework and some of the flooring installation, that's very important to keep that at a low humidity. And keeping a nice and comfortable environment for the workers is most certainly productive too. So very good question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Along those lines, I did have the opportunity to tour the building earlier today with Dr. Yanni, and it was very comfortable inside. It is thrilling to see all those curtain walls going up. It really makes the building feel complete. I mean, obviously the back portion of the building is still far from complete, but those portions that are there, are, it's a big change from the last time I was there 3 or 4 weeks ago. Art.
Zach, the picture we're looking at right now doesn't show any of the solar panels. I'm just wondering where we are with the solar panels. When do we start installing them, and how's it going with that in terms of costs or everything else?
The costs are not going to go up. That was a set number for the solar panels. We have begun discussion on them. They are being manufactured. We are trying to get them a little bit earlier than originally anticipated. But what we need to do first is make sure that the roof and the coping, all the edge metal, everything on the roof is 100% complete. And then we have the manufacturer come out and inspect the roof, sign off on it, at which point then we will begin to install those solar panels.
So Zach, which portions of roof will have the panel?
I can't really point to it, but what you see is the highest portion there, which is over the stage. It's got a little bit of like a white front on it. There's going to be solar panels there. There's going to be solar panels on the area of the roof directly behind that. There's going to be solar panels on the area to the left of the high stage wall. And then if you look on the gym is to the left of the stage, there's going to be solar panels there. And then to the right, you see some mechanical units inside of a wall, nothing there, but to the right of that, which is over the cafeteria, there will be, so it's those 4 locations: the cafeteria, the stage and auditorium, to the left of that, the main gym, and behind it, which we're going to call your music suite, or you have band, choral, and orchestra. So there will be 4 areas of that building containing those panels.
Anybody else? All right, Zach, thanks very much for the update. Let's move on. Next thing up is our regular SRMS change order for COVID materials.
Have a good evening. We're going to sign off. Thank you.
All right, thanks for coming, Arif.
Thank you.
Yes, so the change order is just our basic change order that we've talked about. As long as COVID-related cleaning protocols need to be in place, we'll see these periodically. So it's $8,090.94.
All right, comments or questions? All right, so members of the committee will move this one forward.
Yes.
Yes.
And I didn't hear Darlene, but we'll say that's
I
enough.
said yes.
Yes from me. Oh, there she is. Okay. Next up, we have disposal of excess obsolete non-repairable equipment. There's a variety of items this month. Anything to say about them, Andy?
I don't think there's anything to say about any of them. If there's questions, we can certainly answer them.
All right, any comments or questions? Okay, members of the committee will move that one forward.
Yes.
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 And yes. Okay. Monthly financial reports, Andy.
Yeah, so this is where I will just add in, I know we have a massive agenda to get through tonight, so I'm going to try and focus on the major highlights here. So the treasurer's report and the other financial reports package, there's nothing really significant to note in there, so I'm not planning on going through them. If there's questions at the end, I will certainly answer them. I want to spend a couple of minutes on the revenue and expense projections. Since that factors into some of the other recommendations that we'll talk about tonight. So I do just want to look at this briefly and walk through it. That while there are no material changes from the prior month when we looked at this, our project surplus is still approximately, or we're projecting an end of year surplus of approximately $5.7 million. You can see that in the total column there at the bottom, so 5,678,000. Projecting 3.5 million more revenue than budgeted. And again, we've talked about this, but that's primarily due to our current budget year anticipated negative impacts of COVID on local revenues that just did not materialize this year, which is a positive for the district. And then we're projecting $6 million under the expenditure budget, primarily due to one-time impacts of COVID. A large portion of this projection is savings that will not recur again in the future. And again, I'll note that a lot of the notes underneath this sort of go into the details around what's driving some of those one-time savings that we're seeing here. So in summary, I would say we are way ahead of what the plan set out for the year, and that is largely being driven by the pandemic that was expected to have significant negative economic impacts that have not materialized, along with local revenues some local revenues being historically strong this year, like EIT, if you look in the other financial reports. So EIT continues to trend strong compared to prior years, and even trends slightly above month to month where we were last year at this point in many of the months. So so that's where we are as we project out. Now again, June is still an estimation. There are still lots of things that happen between now and the end of the year, and even over the summer months, that will still impact this projection. We believe we've got all of the major items captured in our projections that are, will still flow through until we have our audit in September. But I feel very comfortable with these projections where we're at as we start to look at the budget and the recommendation for the capital reserve and the committed fund balance. So I'll stop there and ask if there's any questions on what I presented or anything specifically in the other reports.
Comments or questions? Okay, hearing none. So let's, members of the committee will move these reports forward.
Yes.
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 All right, let's move on. And budgetary transfers, are you including that, Andy, in your?
I think it's safe to include that in. Yeah, none of those. There's some transfers, but none of them are impacting or having a negative impact on our projections.
Okay. Any comments or questions on budgetary transfers? All right, and so members of the committee will move those forward as well.
Yes.
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 All right, on to everybody's favorite topic. Let me kick it to Dr. Yanni for our discussion of the final budget.
Thank you, Mr. Sirota. As Mr. Leckman presents the final budget tonight, I want everyone to remember that this time last year, we were told by every governmental and educational entity to really prepare for the worst. And so as we look at the fact that our numbers are better this year than expected, I don't want anyone that's listening tonight or that will watch the meeting in the future think that we were too conservative or not conservative enough. We were absolutely doing what PASBO and what PASA and the Department of Education was telling us to do last year. As Mr. Leckman goes through the budget tonight, he'll talk about millage increase and tax increase recommendations. He'll also talk about some major areas of the budget and some of the work that we've done. So I want to thank Mr. Leckman and his team and our entire leadership team and the board for the last couple of months of getting the budget to the spot where we're at tonight. So with that, Mr. Leckman, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Dr. Yanni. So as Dr. Yanni alluded to, after 10 months of work, we've reached the end of the budget development process for the 21-22 fiscal year. While work on the budget is never really done, we've reached the point where we must formally, the board must formally approve a tax rate set for the next fiscal year. As we've been working through the details on the budget since the preliminary budget in December, so many times we've talked about this. Tonight, I'm only planning on providing a brief overview of the budget and changes from the proposed final budget in May. And this presentation includes a lot of the same slides that we did look at last month. So I'm not going to go through some of them in great detail, but they're in here just as context for the overall story. So what you can see here is the timeline. This has been in every presentation for the last couple of months, and you can see we're at that last point there in June where we're approving or putting before the board to consider the approval of our final budget. And the budget is almost the same form as the proposed final budget presented last month, so not much has changed. As a reminder, the current placeholder for the tax increase is 3%, which was the recommendation of the committee in May, just to leave as a placeholder until we went through this final review in June. You can see that we were able to find expenditure savings of almost $150,000 in the budget after a final needs-based staffing reviews have been completed. And you can see the budget includes total revenues of $107,911,876 compared to total expenditures of $106,348,540 and a planned transfer to the capital reserve of $1.9 million, which has been in all along. And that gets us to a net deficit of about $336,000. So highlighting the changes, where did that savings come from? The only change that was made was a budgeted reduction of 5 instructional assistant positions. And I say budgeted reduction because this is being achieved through attrition or open positions. So no staff were furloughed in order to achieve that savings. And it was achieved through the needs-based process that we've gone through, not just on the equipment and supplies and services side, but also when looking at staffing and making sure we align all staff to meet student needs. So this generated approximately $170,000 in expenditure savings, along with a corresponding reduction of $20,000 in state revenues. And again, just a quick reminder on that in case anyone's saying, well, how does a reduction in staff generate losses in state revenues? Salary expense directly applies to our state PSERS contribution. So for every dollar in salaries, we pay about 34 cents to PSERS, and then we actually get reimbursement back from the state for that. So as our PSERS costs go down, the reimbursement back from the state goes down as well. So property taxes, we reviewed this slide last month and it stays pretty much the same. What you see here is we currently have a 3% placeholder in the budget for a property tax increase, and we have scenarios down to 2.5%, which remains our recommendation to the board for where the tax increase should be. The reduction from 3 to 2.5% increases the projected deficit by about $406,000 to a deficit of $742,000. Which I do believe is very manageable. And every 1/10% reduction in the tax rate would be an impact of about $75,000. I do want to spend a minute on this slide. This sort of captures a lot of information, and there was a question last month around fund balance. So reviewing fund balance projections is essential for 2 main purposes as part of this presentation and 2 future agenda items tonight. Assuring fund balance projections are in line with board policy guidelines, which recommends an unassigned fund balance of between 5 and 8% of budgeted expenditures, and preparing for a later agenda item discussing the transfer of the capital reserve and additional committed fund balance. So what you see here is the first 4 columns look at the 2021 budget year compared to year-end estimates. The first column shows the budget with an ending unassigned fund balance of $4.6 million, a little over that, which is only about 4.4% of budgeted expenditures. The second through the fourth columns look at estimates through the end of the year. So the second column there includes just the projected ending revenues and expenses as I reviewed with you tonight. And you can see that would get us to a little over $14 million or 14%. The third column includes those projections plus the recommended $5 million transfer that we reviewed last month and is on the agenda tonight again. So if we make that transfer, we would be down to about 9.3% fund balance compared to expenditures. And then the fourth column includes 2 and 3 plus the recommended additional committed fund balance of $539,000 for real estate assessment appeals, which would bring the fund balance down to 8.8%. So the next 2 columns over then, 21 and 22, then just assume, so we have a placeholder to look at, assume that the transfer to the capital reserve and the fund balance are approved, which would be the most amount of money moving out of unassigned fund balance, then where would that leave us? And what you can see there is column 5 assumes a 3% tax increase, the current placeholder, with a $336,000 deficit. The fund balance would be around almost 8.3 million and just under the board guideline of 8%. And column 6 assumes a 2.5% tax increase with a $742,000 deficit, and the fund balance would still be about $7.8 million or 7.4% of budgeted expenditures. So even if those 2 would be approved, the fund balance is still at the upper range of the board guidelines, which is a much healthier position than we've been in the past. So this chart here really remains the core of the decisions that the board needs to make regarding budget and tax increases. And the takeaway here must continue to be that the 21-22 budget, where we're at right now, is in a very reasonable position, even at the 2.5% recommended increase. Note that the blue line, the expenditure growth, is trending higher than the gray and orange lines, which are the revenue growth over time. So you can see expenses are growing away from revenues. And if nothing else changes, the gap between revenues and expenses will be about $5 million in 24-25, which is what we're trying to guard against. This slide here is which I showed you last month. That just shows you our assessed value trends, which shows that from our new developments, we've seen a nice growth in assessed value, which has certainly helped where we started this year at about a $3.6 million deficit at our preliminary budget to get us to where we are now. So we've seen things trending in the right direction, and new developments will continue to provide new, increased assessments over the next 2 to 3 years. But even with that said, again, if you look at nothing else changing in that gap of $5 million, new developments are estimated to bring in about an additional, the bottom right corner of the slide, $4.7 million. So new developments based on current trends will just sort of fill in that gap that we have, which is, it's a good place to be in that we see some of that gap filling in, but new developments certainly aren't tipping us into significant surpluses. Act 1 trends is something that you saw, we talked about last month. Again, this just gives you a sense over since 14-15 how the actual tax increases, the orange line, have compared to the Act 1 index. And you can see over the last 4 years, we've been under the index. And again, if the recommendation or something else is accepted tonight below 3%, that would be 5 years in a row below the index. These next 3 slides are comparison slides, which I've covered in many prior presentations because I feel it tells an important part of our story when there's comparisons to other school districts. And this chart starts off by comparing millage rates of where Upper Dublin is compared to our surrounding school districts in Montgomery County. And you can see that we're about in the middle of the road here if you factor out the 3 mills that were approved by voter referendum for the Upper Dublin High School. And again, I like to note here, if you look at Colonial, Upper Marion, and Wissahickon specifically, they're the lowest millage rates. But when you move to the next slide, so I want you to keep your eye on those areas of the chart. You can see that Colonial, Upper Marion, and Wissahickon have significantly higher assessed values, and Colonial and Upper Marion have significant commercial assessed values as compared to other districts, including here in Upper Dublin. And then the last slide, you can see those 3 remain higher. So this is assessed value per pupil when you look at enrollment to put it on sort of an apples to apples basis. What you see here is that Wissahickon, as an example, compared to Upper Dublin, Wissahickon's millage is a little over 21 and Upper Dublin's is 35, but Wissahickon's assessed value per student is around $800,000 versus Upper Dublin of $550,000. So Wissahickon needs to have less millage than Upper Dublin to provide the same level of revenue per student. And their increases generate more revenue per student than what Upper Dublin's does. Homestead Exclusion Act is, again, we talked about this last month, so I won't spend too much time here, but this is state revenue that comes directly to school districts, and sort of it flows directly through school districts as a reduction to approved property owners' homesteads within the township. You can see that the revenue that we received this year is slightly lower. The number slightly lower is a good thing compared to last year when we thought it would be significantly lower. The number of approved homesteads is slightly higher. So you can see that the property tax relief per homestead is reduced by about $4 per home. So where does that leave us? Some items we cannot anticipate, others we're waiting on final decisions by this board and outside entities. These are very similar to what we talked about last month. These are typically open items that we regularly don't have all the answers to when when a school district is asked to approve their final budget. But tonight, the main item that this committee, I think, needs to focus on, and other board members that are here, would be to focus on the final property tax increase and making a recommendation for Monday night. Ideally, it would be nice to have sort of a known number. Obviously, things could still change on Monday, but direction on how you want us to prepare all of the final documents for the meeting on Monday night. So I suggest we take questions on the presentation here, and then we have that discussion as part of the next agenda item, which are the budget resolutions. So I'll stop there and ask if there's any questions.
All right, yeah, thanks, Andy. So I agree with that strategy. If there are questions or comments on the presentation, let's talk about them, and we'll talk about, I am going to go around the virtual table and ask for your input on the final budget number. I am thinking that maybe we want to talk about items H and I before we do that, because I think for some people those may be tied together. But for now, are there comments or questions on the presentation? All right, I'm not terribly surprised I don't see anything, because we have gone over this several times. Andy, we'll come back to item G, because that's where we're really going to make the decision. But let's talk about items H and I first.
Sure thing. Okay, well, let's get back in. So H and I, let's start with the transfer to the capital reserve fund. And Brooke, if you can just open, yep, thank you. So the transfer to the capital reserve fund is an item that was reviewed with the finance committee meeting, the finance committee last month. Tonight, I am going to confirm my recommendation to transfer $5 million from the general fund to the capital reserve. So just to give a quick summary, my recommendation is based on the projected surplus for the 2021 school year, as I reviewed tonight. It's the beginning of the development of the funding plan for an estimated $40 million in capital projects over the next 10 years. And with that, I look at it as every dollar saved now is a dollar less that would need to be borrowed in the future for this work. This is work that will need to be done as we lay it out over the next 10 years. Fund balance projections discussed tonight fully support this transfer while maintaining an unassigned fund balance within the guidelines of the board fund balance policy. And again, this memo covers all the details, so I won't read it, but I'm happy to answer any specific questions about that recommendation.
Any comments or questions on that? Again, I think it's not quite identical to what we reviewed last month, but it is pretty darn close. Mike.
Hi, Mr. Leckman, can you clarify one more time for, not necessarily for the board members, but also for the folks listening in, with the $5 million transfer, that is assuming a 3% tax increase?
Yeah, based on the fund balance projections that I went through in the presentation, I'm still comfortable with that total transfer, even at a 2.5%.
At a 2.5%. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
That would leave our ending unassigned fund balance around 7.4%, which is still a good solid number.
It's actually excellent relative to where we've been over the last several years. We've been
Right.
recovering that number over time.
And last question, do you have a feel, or do we have a feel for how 2.5% is landing Upper Dublin in relation to school districts in our region?
Well, why don't we, not to put it off,
Save that
Mike,
one?
let's get to that topic when we
Say that one?
go around the
Okay.
table. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Anyone else on the transfer to capital reserve? I won't ask yet whether we're moving that one forward. We'll do all that together. Let's talk about the committed fund balance for assessment appeals.
Yeah, so I'm going to spend a little more time on this one since we haven't talked about this in great detail yet. So I think last month I hinted at this a little bit in the presentation, but tonight I'm formalizing it to bring it forward as a formal recommendation. So I'm recommending increasing the committed fund balance from $960,279 to $1.5 million, which is an increase of about $539,000. And first, I want to start by providing an overview of fund balance and what a committed fund balance actually is. So Board Policy 620 provides all of the details around management of the district fund balance. And this is a really critical policy for us because there are multiple types of fund balance or fund balance designations. This policy defines them all along with how they are to be managed. So typically, you hear me say fund balance a lot, but typically when you hear me talk about fund balance, I'm referring to the unassigned portion of the fund balance. An unassigned fund balance is the district general savings account, which can be used for any purpose and it's not restricted in any way. So our policy states that that portion of the fund balance should remain in a range from 5 to a maximum of 8% of budgeted expenditures. The committed portion of the fund balance, which we do have 2 of them right now. We have commitments for healthcare rate stabilization, and we do have a commitment, like I said, for real estate assessment appeals. Fund balance, those types of fund balance are designated for a specific purpose. And in this case, we're talking about real estate assessment appeals, and funds can only be committed by board action and require board action to change if the funds would ever be needed for another purpose. So once they're put in this bucket, the board would still have the ability to change that in the future if those funds were ever needed for something else. There are 3 main reasons for this recommendation. One is the uncertainty of the real estate market. So right now, COVID has created a new work from home reality, creating less demand for office spaces. And I think if that trend continues, which is still a bit of an unknown, there is risk of declining values of commercial real estate. And that risk has the potential to lead to more assessment appeals. The district largest taxpayer. So the Promenade will soon become the district's largest taxpayer when the project is completed. There's a potential for this property to have an assessed value 66% higher than our second largest taxpayer. And the Promenade will make up about 3% of the total property tax revenue for the district. And then the third one is fund balance policy management. So along with mitigating those first two risks, this fund balance commitment will assure that the ending unassigned fund balance remains within the district policy guidelines of 5 to 8%. So are there any questions I can answer about committed fund balance?
Especially for the newer board members, because I think this is the first time for several of you to have a discussion about fund balance commitments. Any comments or questions in the general case or specifically about this recommendation? Art, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, this is great, Andy. I really support this. I mean, the only concern I have is it's not that much money, the real estate assessment appeals. Before you and Dr. Yanni got here, had something called a hub reassessment that I think was over $6 million. I mean, if anything, I'm really pleased that we're increasing this pot, but I think we need to continue looking at it in the future, especially after COVID and the commercial concerns that we have. That, you know, it could possibly not be enough, and so that's my only concern. But I really do appreciate that we're making a first step in increasing this fund balance.
Even looking more recently, how much was the Prudential assessment appeal worth in total? Andy, do you have that number?
Yeah, I don't know if I know that number off the top of my head now. It's like 2 years old. So I want to say it was over $1.5 million.
Yeah, I think it was.
Yep.
Just that one item. 2 or 3, yeah.
Darlene.
I think that it's really important for us to have this kind of fun. As we look at our bigger picture of where we're going and all the projects that, you know, we need to attend to, I think it's important to have dedicated funding to deal with some of the issues that are definitely going to arise. I think in the past, obviously, you take the hit, but you then have to figure out where you're going to get that money from. And I do support, and I think I'm with Art, it really doesn't seem like enough money. And I think that we need to plan and come up with a plan for how we're going to increase that to something that we would be comfortable with in the future. But I do certainly support, setting aside some money to get that started.
Anybody else? All right, yeah, I do see these sorts of commitments to a certain extent, like insurance policies. They provide a buffer against unexpected, unanticipated large expenses. I don't think they're meant to necessarily cover the entire thing, but they're meant to make it more possible or more comfortable to address them if they do come up. So I don't think we need to have necessarily an assessment appeal commitment as big as the hub, just because we had that in the past. It's a buffer, not a complete solution. That said, I also completely support this. I think it makes a lot of sense for all three of the reasons that Andy mentioned. So now that we've covered those two items, they do relate to our final budget number in a couple of ways. They relate to it, as Andy outlined in one of his slides, regarding the where we land with unassigned fund balance in next year's budget. In addition to, obviously there are other regular financial implications, but I do also want to call attention, as Andy hinted, to the relationship between one-time items and ongoing items. We do have a one-time surplus. Our large surplus this year is driven in large measure by COVID. We hope that is a one-time. I hate to call it a good thing, but we came out better than expected this year, largely due to what was fundamentally a bad thing. I don't want to conflate that with ongoing expenses. As Andy pointed out, the graph he likes to show, showing expenses growing at a higher rate than revenues. So let's keep in mind the difference between one-time and ongoing expenses and revenues as we consider where we want to land with final budget. So what I'd like to do is go around the table and ask everyone to answer 3 questions. Where would you like to be in terms of the tax increase percentage? Do you support the $5 million transfer to capital reserve, and do you support the increase commitment for real estate assessment appeals? And it doesn't have to be just a yes or no. If if somebody thinks we ought to adjust those numbers in some way, certainly say so as well. Is anyone brave enough to go first?
Well,
Go ahead, Art.
I strongly support Andy's recommendations of increasing those 2 accounts. I would not like us to go above 2.5. Would like us to try to get a little bit below 2.5, even if it's just 248 or 249. But I would not support anything above 2.5. And again, that's it.
All right, thanks, Darlene.
I would not support anything above 2.5. I'm always looking to get as low as we can. So, I don't think the work is done until we have to vote on it. So I would encourage the administration to, keep working to see if we can bring it down even a little bit more. I think that would be great. I do support the 5 million for the capital fund. And, I kind of like round numbers. I don't know if the
960 and change, yeah.
the 960 and change, could we just make that, 1 million? And then come up with a plan for how we want to increase that to whatever number, Mr. Leckman and his team and Dr. Yanni feels is prudent for the district.
So did I hear you'd like to be at 2.5 or less, but you'd like to reduce the increased assessment appeal from 1.5 to 1 million?
Or what was it?
So Andy's recommending we increase the commitment to 1.5 million. I heard you say 1 million.
I just want a little more information to know where we're going, so that and how we're getting there. So, 1.5 million, obviously, maybe where we're starting, where are we trying to get to? How quickly are we trying to get there? Does that need to be more, or could it be less?
And Dr. Davis, it's an odd number. It's an odd number because Mr. Leckman wants us to get to 1.5. But he's looking at what we already have. How much do we need to get to 1.5? So it depends which way you look at it.
Right. So if 1.5 is where we need to be right now, I certainly support the 960 to get there. If it's not enough and he feels we need to, maybe take a look and get that a little higher as a starting point, just having that information, I would support that as well.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff.
Not the 1.5.
Okay. Jeff.
Yeah, I strongly support both of the recommended fund transfers. I mean, the one to the capital planning makes a lot of sense. On the real estate assessment fund transfer, I'm fine with the unrounded number to get to a rounded number, because I think obviously it seems to me that the recommendation is to get to that 1.5, and I think there is a lot of sense in putting that there as well. And in terms of the tax increase, I'm kind of with the prior speakers that I would support the 2.5. I don't support going above 2.5. If we can nudge it a little bit south of 2.5, I would wholly support that as well.
All right, thank you, Mike.
Yeah, I too see this as a one-time kind confluence of favorable revenue to budget and expenditure to budget event. We have a excellent opportunity to kind of cover a lot of bases all at the same time with the capital expense funding opportunity, as well as keeping our tax increase well below the Act 1 standard. So I strongly recommend using some of the 5 million to support this one-time tax relief opportunity to get us somewhere between 2.25% and 2.5%. And I know that we as a team are kind of trending in that direction. And I'll fully support where we land.
So Mike, just to make sure I understood correctly, you would be comfortable reducing the transfer to capital reserve in order to also reduce the tax increase?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Stan?
Yeah, yes, I agree that perhaps we can go a little bit below 2.5%. I'm good with the 1.5 million on the assessment fund. If it stays pretty high for next year, we won't have to contribute much to that next year. So if we keep it, if we bring it up to 1.5 and we don't use a lot of that money, then we look good for next year. And I agree, transfer of the 5 million to the capital fund. It would be some great seed money for next year. And I think Bob Lester would appreciate the monies that he can get some projects going.
Okay, I didn't hear a number from you on the tax increase. Did you?
Yes, anything below 2.5.
Okay.
So 2.45, 2.4, 2.8, anything like that is good enough for me.
Jen?
Yes, so I support all of these decisions that Andy has presented. He's done a great job explaining all of his recommendations to us. So I'm fine with the 2.5 or lower. I think that is reasonable. And the transfers, the 5 million and the real estate to get us to 1.5. I support all that.
Okay, great. Titia was unable to be here tonight, but she did send me her input, and she said largely the same thing that all of you are saying. She's comfortable at 2.5, love it to be a little lower if it was possible. And she's great with the 5 million and the additional commitment for assessment appeals. And Amy had to drop off the call a little bit earlier. I don't see her back, but she also did let me know that she is also comfortable with those numbers. So what I heard in summary was we're all comfortable at 2.5. We'd all love it to be a little bit lower than that. I mean, I didn't say my piece, which is 2.5 is a comfortable number. I would love to be able to continue to say that we have been below the median for Lower Montgomery County. Right now, we're right at the median. There's only one more district that will vote before we vote next Monday. So 2.5 or a hair less sounds like where we are. Andy, so if you could bring us documents for 2.5 for Monday, I think it sounds like the board would be comfortable with that. So let's go to item G. We'll start with, and I will ask the committee, are we comfortable moving forward? So what these are the actual resolutions that we would vote on Monday night. So members of the committee, are we comfortable moving forward with those numbers with a 2.5% tax increase? I saw
Yes.
a nod from Stan. Heard Mike
Yes.
and Darlene.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
2.4 would be better.
Well, I mean, so now's the time. there's only 2 business, or really 1 business day between now and then. So we need to give Andy a number to prepare. Mike is recommending 2.4. I don't know if I heard you recommend, you laughed that 2.4 would be better, and I think we all would love lower. But naturally, we also have a number of other competing priorities. So, Mike, are you making a recommendation? Should we discuss 2.4? I'm happy to discuss it if that's a recommendation from you. Mike has frozen.
Yes, I would like to discuss it, but again, we're going to work with to obtain a consensus. So
right. Okay. Let's. All right. So Art, I see your hand is up. Did you have an opinion about that?
You mentioned something about the median. Where would we have to go to be just below the median tax increase in Montgomery County?
2.5. 2.5, we're effectively tied at the median. We could have a lower 2.5 than the other 2.5. If we went 2.49, we would be, clearly and comfortably below the median. Or actually, no, I'm sorry, we'd be at the median at 2.4. If we want to be below the median, give me just a moment. I do have it in another window right here. Or if anyone else, I know we've shared this spreadsheet. If anyone else has it up, feel free to jump in. I think it's 2.24, something like that. There it is. We would need to be at 2.23 would be the next one down from where we are right now. So that's a pretty significant jump from where we are.
Well, knowing that the budget had been prepared from a 3.0 to a 2.5, I don't feel it's fair to Andy and the administration to jump too far because we don't have any data supporting like where we're getting that number.
Well, that number would come out of fund balance unless, as Mike's,
I feel really strongly that we need to pay attention to what we're doing with our fund balances. We have too many capital projects on the horizon, and I'm not in support of reducing what we're going to put in our fund balance. I think we really need to put the 5 million there. I really want those contingency funds because I think they're very important. So unless we have somewhere else where we're going to get the money to take it all the way down to like a 2.4, 2.2, and I would like to hear from Mr. Lackman because we started talking about maybe a little below 2.5, but I think that when you're talking 2.2, 2.4, you're talking something much more significant. And I think that the budget has been prepared and presented to us in a way that I totally support. So I would rather stay at 2.5 than to just, sit here and pick a number out of the air that we don't know what that really means in terms of the budget that he's already prepared.
Okay, and Mike did also say, just to, I'm playing back what you said, Mike, and you correct me if I don't have it right, that he would be comfortable using some money from the capital reserve transfer to provide a one-time savings on tax increase. I'm personally not in favor of that because it's conflating one-time and ongoing sources. So
right.
That I'd rather stick with the 5 million. That, as Andy said, that's money we don't have to borrow in the future. Every penny we set aside now is money we won't have to borrow. We know that there's some significant discomfort with debt in our community. So anything we can do to offset future debt, I think, is valuable.
Yeah, that's a good balance.
Yeah.
There's the tax relief side, but there's also the managing our debt, which the community is very sensitive to. So we need to balance it.
Yeah. So so anyone else want to comment on Mike's proposal of 2.4? All right, Mike, it sounds, oh, no, I'm sorry, Art.
I would not go down that low. I mean, if anything, I'm just talking the 248 or 249, which really is not significant. I mean, if the administration is saying, let's go with the 2.5, in my opinion, then let's just go with the 2.5. I agree with Darlene.
All right, anybody else? So it sounds like, all right, so Mike, are you comfortable with that conversation?
Absolutely.
All right.
I think it's important for us to share our thought processes so the community can understand all of the different factors that we're weighing when we discuss the capital fund transfer, the tax increase level, et cetera, et cetera. So thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Do you mind, Mr. Sirota, if I just jump in here?
Yeah, please.
A little bit.
Yeah.
So I think, we do have a short turnaround between tonight and the legislative meeting. But if Mr. Leckman and I get together tomorrow and we do our final look at the budget and we get it down to 248, is that something that the board is comfortable with?
From what I heard from the discussion just now, if you came in at 248 and that was your recommendation, we all said 2.5 or a little less would be great. So I think 248 by what I heard from the board would be great.
All right, so Andy and I will get together tomorrow morning and we'll see.
In the meantime, it sounds like if that doesn't happen, we're all also comfortable with 2.5. If you don't, find that little amount, a millage rate of that works out to 36,1449. That meets everyone else's wishes as well. So anywhere in that range, I think we're good. All right. So let me ask again, members of the committee, are we prepared to move these final budget resolutions forward at a tax rate of 2.5, or if they're able to bring it down to 248 or 249, are we comfortable with that?
Yes.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Thank you. All right. And then next item H, the transfer to $5 million transfer to capital reserve. Are we prepared to move that one forward as is?
Yes.
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 All right, me too. And then our commitment for assessment appeals, item I, are we prepared, which is the increase in commitment from the current 960,000 to 1.5 million. Are we comfortable with that recommendation?
Yes.
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 And yes for me. All right, great. That was the hard part. So now we have a whole bunch of additional regular June items on the agenda. Andy, why don't you take us through them?
Yep, I think we can move through these pretty quickly. So these are our standard annual renewal of our insurance policies. So we work with Willis Towers Watson as our insurance broker. There are no changes in policy or coverages from the prior year. We're very comfortable with the coverages that we have. The increase is about $35,000 from the prior year, which is 7.3%. That was anticipated in our budget. That is what Willis Towers Watson sort of projected for us. The one item to note here is the cyber liability policy, the premium here, the increase there. We did talk about that in the proposed final budget last month, but you can see the increase here. I am happy to report that we were not sure, working with our broker, where we would land with that policy. Nationwide, we're seeing exponential increases in cybercrime. So insurance companies are just trying to get out of this business, but they did find us a company that we're all comfortable with, that was able to provide us with a similar policy to what we have. But this is something we'll have to keep our eye on moving forward.
Andy, there's also, nothing compared to the cyber liability increase, but there's a significant increase in the E&O policy. Is that because it had held steady for a few years, or is there something else driving that increase?
Well, I think we have a large claim that's sort of in the works, so that's driving a portion of it. And then you also see sort of the statutory limit for claims to be brought back against school districts expanding exponentially. That's driving some of that in the marketplace. So a large portion of that, though, is our large ongoing claim that we have open.
Okay. Any other comments or questions on this item? Okay, so members of the committee will move that one forward.
Yes.
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 All right. This is our regular annual fund depositories item is up next.
Yeah, so fund depositories and cooperative purchasing agreements, I will just take those two together. So they're
Okay.
standard annual items that we have to approve. We need to approve all of our banks that we have deposits with on an annual basis. And then we have to approve all of the cooperative purchasing agreements that we use in order to run our purchasing program efficiently and make sure we're following local, state, and federal guidelines for purchasing.
Any comments or questions on these items? And they're the same, both of them have the same list of depositories and the same list of purchasing agreements, right?
Correct.
Yep. All right, members of the committee were prepared to move that forward.
Yes.
Yes.
All right, we've got 2 settlement stipulations.
Yeah,
I mean,
so
you
I'll
want
just,
to take item O as well at the same time.
sure, we'll just take them all together at the same time.
Okay.
I'm fine with that. So M and N are just our small residential assessment appeals that we're settling per our normal process. So I'll answer questions if there are any. And then item O, we have 4 commercial appeals that have been opened this year that we've talked about prior. The next step in the process is for us to actually go out and get our own appraisal for these properties so that we can make an assessment on how we move forward, what the next steps are. So we typically use Valbridge for this work. You can see the not to exceed cost for each of these. They do 2 things for us. They will give us first a verbal appraisal. And if that number is enough to resolve it, we get charged half of the fee for that. And then if it's not, and we need the full written report to resolve the issue, that's when we would pay the second half of the fee up to the not to exceed.
Comments or questions on these 3 items? Stan?
Yeah, Andy, what's the time period of how long does the appraisal last? I mean, will that be honored if they say, does it last 6 months? Does it last a year? Does it last a week?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. I don't know that I know the answer to that. I know the appraisal is done based on the timeline of when the appeal was filed. So if they filed for, August 2020, then the appraisal would be done sort of as of August 2020. If it drags on and it becomes a multi-year type appeal that just doesn't come to settlement and we're still working on it, it's possible one could be needed in the future, but it's probably not likely.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, so members of the committee, we've got 3 items to move forward.
Yes.
Yes.
All right, and yes for me. Moving on to summer 2021 payments.
Yes, this is since there's no July committee or board meetings, we do need to continue business of paying bills. So this would be an authorization for the business office to continue to pay bills over the summer months and then report that back to the board in August, along with the standard approval of payments for the August board meeting.
Right, and this is also something that we do every year. Any comments or questions? Okay, so we'll move that one forward.
Yes.
Yes.
All right, thank you. It looks like Prakash, you've been waiting patiently to cover 5 items here.
Thank you, Mr. Sorda.
Thank you for giving me a break.
Thank you, Mr. Sorda. So tonight I'll be presenting a few contracts supporting upgrades to our network hardware along with end user applications. So last November, the tech team started to identify hardware and software that is approaching end of life or has surpassed its shelf life. This process has allowed us to create a refresh timeline that parallels the age of the hardware and the support life, while also allowing us to project future expenditures. Having current hardware is also going to allow us the ability to install firmware and software that is in compliance with network security and safety. The current industry standard for hardware is 5 years, while software is driven by hardware compatibility. So the first contract that you see here is from E+ for core switch replacement. We use the core switches for the interconnect of our WAN fiber network connection between our schools, the admin center, and also our IU. Due to the age of the current core switch, it's no longer going to be supported by Cisco. And so in January, we started to work with the IU to submit our application for network hardware bid for E-rate. And in this process, we were able to project some cost for these upgrades for the 21-22 school year. And so after reviewing the bids, we recommend moving forward with allowing E+ to help us perform the upgrades for the upcoming school year. E+ has recommended Cisco next generation core switch, which is the same brand that we're using for some of our other network hardware. These switches will also provide us with a higher bandwidth and also for future options for upgrades for our networking needs. Questions for the E+ switches?
Anyone have comments or questions for Prakash on this item? Okay, and Prakash, this is to be installed over the summer, I assume?
So the process will start over the summer, and then once the hardware is received, E+ will coordinate the installation process.
Okay. All right, members of the committee will move this one forward.
Yes.
Yes.
All right, and yes from me. Moving on, internet service contract.
Yeah, so this is a renewal yearly contract with MCIU for our regional wide area network management and internet service. We would like to continue user service for the upcoming school year.
Okay, and this is not a change in bandwidth or other services. This is a simple renewal of the contract, right?
Yes.
Any other comments or questions? All right, so we'll move that one forward.
Yes.
Yes.
And yes,
Yes.
from me, okay. Storage.
So as I said, back in November, we started this process to evaluate our hardware and identify any of the hardware that may be outdated. So the SAN storage system that we do have was installed in 2014, so it has served us well, and it's long overdue for an upgrade. And so due to the age of the hardware, we're recommending a refresh of our SAN storage system. We don't want to have a situation where we end up having data loss or disruption to our VMware. So it is highly recommended that we move forward with updating our storage system. This particular system should take us out for the next 5 years, and then we will reevaluate and make recommendations for refresh.
All right, and I see I didn't remember to ask in the previous one. This one is a 5-year, does include a 5-year support contract as well. Were the previous ones annual, or is that are they long-term as well?
Most of the supports are for 5 years. The only one that isn't 5 year, there's one that was for 3 years, but we do have the option to add additional support service.
Okay. All right, other comments or questions on the SAN replacement?
I just would say, I think it's overdue, so definitely support moving forward.
All right, Mike all right, so, and Darlene's ready, I'm ready, Stan or Mike?
Yep.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, thank you. Moving on to, where are we, backup server.
Yes, so this is our Hewlett-Packard Enterprise backup server. So again, this is another piece of hardware that we have currently in usage that is outdated. It's approximately 8 years old. Some of the servers that are backed up on this backup server are print solution services from PaperCut, our Cisco access points, which is our Wi-Fi access system. We have our file server, which is just a repository of user and application files. So this is going to need to be refreshed as well, as it is surpassed its shelf life.
And certainly critical.
Yes, and then this is the one that has the initial 3 years. but we did work with the Integra One to be able to add additional 2 years thereafter.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Art?
Gosh, the first item we did tonight is eligible for E-rate. These other items are not.
Correct.
And what makes them different?
So the E-rate is for either network or internet upgrades only.
So these are, Prakash, let me ask this related question. And I apologize for not asking it ahead of time, but over time, do we see on-prem services declining, or we're going to be in this business for the foreseeable future?
They're declining for sure, and we have very few on-site servers compared to many of the districts. A lot of our systems are cloud-based, so we are minimal as far as having on-site servers.
And that is an advantage in terms of the ransomware that I guess a lot of districts are.
Not necessarily. Ransomware can certainly apply no matter where it's
cloud.
hosted.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So it doesn't impact our security profile one way or the other, pretty much.
But no, well, no.
It impacts, yes, it impacts, and like if we cannot deploy current firmware or security patches because the hardware is outdated and it cannot support those updates, then yes, there's vulnerability there for us.
Got it. Okay.
It also certainly, I mean, the on-prem versus cloud-based certainly also affects it, but it doesn't. Neither one is magic. It is just a different attack profile, different attack surface for the bad guys.
Okay.
All right. So we're prepared to move the backup server to the legislative meeting.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yes.
All right, and yes from me. And last up, Rufna.
Ruvna. So Ruvna is the real-time school crisis and emergency management application platform that allows us to locate and account for students in real time during an emergency. We recommend continue utilizing Ruvna for the upcoming school year.
So Ruvna, we purchased originally, I believe, or licensed originally for as part of our COVID mitigation strategies. Am I correct, or did we have that before COVID?
We added that functionality to it last year.
Okay, and so we foresee continuing with some of our. We've learned something during COVID that we're going to continue here. Is that what's happening?
This is actually for, we had started using Ruvna at the high school several years ago to account for students and staff during emergency drills. And then we took it to the middle school, and the next logical step is to take it down to our elementaries. So it won't do a health screener for next year. We'll be back to using it for safety reasons.
Okay, that's what I'm remembering. I appreciate that. Okay, any other comments or questions? All right, so we'll move that one forward.
Yes.
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 All right, thank you, Prakash. Looking forward to having more updated network infrastructure moving forward. All right, we have several items that are supply bids, Andy, up to DD.
Yes, 13 items V through HH are annual bidding approvals for supply items. So I don't intend to walk through all of these. These are annual items that we go through to manage our purchasing processes. But I do want to talk about one item, which is the paper bid item HH. And Brooke, you don't really need to open it up, but I think it's important just to go through this one item quickly so the board and anyone listening understands some of the things we've done as part of the budgeting process. So every year, obviously, we're moving further and further away, I think, from paper, in a technology world where we're one-to-one, but we still have paper all over. And there's lots of things that require paper and copier and printer. But one of the things that we did here this year is The MCIU facilitates this bid. They send it to us and then we send it out to all the buildings from the business office to ask them what their needs are and built into their needs-based budget. What we did this year was, before we even did that, we did a full inventory of all of our paper across the district. So when everyone sent their requirements back, rather than just looking at it from a building or department specific, we were able to say, okay, Sandy Run, as an example, has a massive supply of paper in their building. They didn't order any last year. And due to some of the challenges that we went through this year, with buildings being closed, students only in parts of the day, we use very little paper there. So we were able to figure out a way to get every school what they need for next year without actually having to order any white paper for next year. And that's important. So really the bid with the IU, we're only looking at a little over $4,000 for some color paper that building needs, versus 2 years ago, we had $50,000 worth of paper that was ordered. And again, this is all built into the budget. So it's not sustainable to have a $4,000 purchase for paper long-term, but it's something that we did this year to generate some savings. So stuff like that is going on all over the place, but it's a very clear example as part of these bids. So I'm happy to answer any questions on any of the specific bids, but that's kind of an idea of what we worked on.
Certainly appreciate that background work. Any comments or questions on items V through HH? No? Okay, so members of the committee will move those forward.
Yes.
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 All right, and next up, just last item, the bid for trash and recycling services.
Yep, so this one it's not a standard annual. This comes up every 3 years. Again, this is another bid that is facilitated by the IU with all of the operations directors in the county. They go out to bid. You can see that report there shows all the tally sheets. The MCIU actually gets all the specifications from the school districts around what our needs are, how many times we need pickups, trash, recycling, all the above. So the low bidder was Waste Management, which is our current provider, and that is at an estimated annual cost of $54,784 per year for the next 3 years.
Okay, and for fans of spreadsheets and comparison data, you feel free to go through this and compare our trash and recycling costs to other districts. Comments and questions, Stan?
Yes, Andy, is this up significantly from last year?
Yeah, when you look at the comparisons, it's up about 10% from last year.
But this is a locked-in rate for 3 years, right?
It is a locked-in rate for 3 years, right there, and it was for the last 3 years as well. So if you look at it on an annual, maybe it was a little over 3% per year.
And that was the low bid, correct?
It was, yes.
Any other comments and questions on this item? All right, so members of the committee, are we prepared to move this forward to the legislative meeting?
Yes.
Yes.
And yes, okay, thank you. So we are through our reports and recommendations, and we are up to community input. So if members of the community would like to address the board on any items that came up tonight, or any other items for that matter, please remember this is a finance committee meeting, and so those are the people who are here. But we can take comments on any item. Please speak your name and where in the district you reside. There is a 4-minute time limit that Brooke will keep track of. Please do remember that the meeting is recorded. So if you would like to speak, please raise your virtual hand. While people are doing that, we did receive 2 comments ahead of time, which I will read right now, and then we'll get to those who wish to speak in person. The first is from Mary Kate Sullivan from Ambler. He says, "No to the bus depot. This will cause so much additional traffic and stress to the Fort Washington Elementary School community, and school days are already long and stressful enough. Keep it where it is and leave the Field of Dreams area for baseball and quickball. absolutely terrible that this is even a consideration. Second comment is from Lisa Bush from Glenside. I'd like to please vote against locating the bus depot behind the Field of Dreams. The students of FWES need a safe, healthy school campus and environment to learn and play. Is there space in the industrial park to consider? Thanks. And those are the only two comments we received ahead of time. I will move forward to those who have their hands raised. You can feel free to raise your hand at any point before we do closed community input. First up, Ms. Vitella, go ahead.
Hi, Jenny Vitella, Ambler. And I just have to say, it would be really nice if this bus depot conversation could have been an own separate meeting or town hall meeting. It was way too much. There's so much to discuss, and that we're glossing over a budget with a 2.5% increase. I just think community members would have been, this is very emotional for a lot of people that live in the proximity of children at Fort Washington Elementary School. And
Ginny, you became muted in the middle of that.
Hi, are you back?
Yeah, you're back.
Do I get my 30 seconds back? Anyway.
It wasn't a whole 30 seconds. It was just the last sentence.
Anyway, I was just hoping that we could have done this in a town hall meeting or some other way to the bus depot. It's very emotional. It's a very big deal. 7.8 million from 5 million from the 3.6 million. It's a big deal. This deserves its due time, as does the budget. And this was too long of a meeting. I had several parents had to drop off because they're volunteering for the 8th grade party, and I'm actually late to go to it. That being said, Fort Washington, there's a big difference between a gravel lot and a paved lot. That area is used for the Fort Washington graduation parade. It's the overflow lot. It is the field day area and lot where they play. It's the car line lot now. There are parties there. The township uses the batting cages, the Field of Dreams, the Lockash Fields. There's a lot of things happening there, a lot of kids. And to add this, small as it may be relatively, monstrosity in that area is just, it's just beyond. There has to be a better solution. And we're looking at $7.8 million. That is just beyond it, too expensive for a building for 50 buses. We've got parking lots all over the place that are already paved we could use. And I want to know if we've talked about or even researched anything in the industrial park, including use of the library lot. When the township bought that library lot, they took close to, I know it's not exact, close to $200,000 off our tax roll for the district. I think we can use some of those spots as repayment. But this needs a lot more discussion, a lot more research. And also, do we ever find out why the depot was never built there in 2008? And where did the $3.6 million go that was set aside for that depot back when the $120 million was approved the referendum? And I also want to just say for the record, we knew that there would be $40 million-ish worth of improvements on all the remaining buildings when we approved or decided to build Sandy Run from scratch. At a $70 million turns out to be $76 million project. So this $40 million renovations or whatever that needed at the other buildings is not new news. It's old news, and we didn't plan for it then. And I just want to remind everybody of that. And also 2.5% increase. It may be in line with a neighboring school district, a 2.5% increase, but our tax base is so much higher. So 2.5% on what someone is paying is a lot more dollar for dollar than in a local district that may have that rate or lower or higher. So I think it's a little disingenuous when we just talk percentages to other school districts versus talking about dollar for dollar, what that actually means. Thank you.
Mark, you're muted.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Thanks for that comment. Ms. Lambert, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I sent an email with my thoughts to Dr. Yanni and the board earlier today. I'm not sure if anyone's or everyone's had a chance to read it. So I'd like to read that now. It was written before the feasibility study, before I saw it. And after the letter, I'd like to make some comments in response to the feasibility study as well. I hope I can do this in my 4 minutes. So I'm Veronica Lambert. I reside in Fort Washington, and we have a daughter at the elementary school at FWES. I do want to take this moment just to thank the school board also for handling for all the efforts this past year and handling the global pandemic. It's been a dramatic and challenging year, and I haven't had the opportunity to come to the meetings and say that. So, but I am here to also discuss the bus garage or bus depot, and I'm concerned about it. I'm concerned that it's being considered to be built right next to our school. I'm writing this before the presentation, as I mentioned, before the feasibility study. And I want to express my discontent just at the mere consideration of placing a bus depot so close to the proximity where 455 students spend 7+ hours of their day. And while I understand the board is faced with financial constraints and needs to make tough decisions, I do struggle with how these decisions are prioritized. Do the financial reasons outweigh the health and safety of our kids? Intuitively, it seems like a bad decision when there are other more industrial locations in Upper Dublin. Have they been properly vetted and considered? Do we need to sacrifice our kids' health and safety for transportation and financial problems that can be resolved in other ways? So these are the things. I have a list of what I wanted to see in the feasibility study. I was curious to see if they would be considered. One, current air quality measures at FWES during different times of the day: rush hour, pickup, drop-off times at school, outdoor gym times, recess times for all grades, etc., and possible air contamination as a result of a bus garage being placed where it's being proposed. Two, how close are the FWES playgrounds and playing fields to the proposed bus garage and fueling station? And how many times a day would kids be exposed to exhaust? Are there classroom, point 3, are there classroom windows that could potentially have exhaust enter when open? I can't believe I have 1 minute and 35 seconds. So I'm gonna let the board read the letter. I'm gonna read our personal story, how this affects us. There's so many concerns I have about this bus depot, but personally, our daughter does suffer from vocal cord dysfunction that landed her at CHOP's intensive care unit for several days in 2019. And this is a disorder that causes her to cough uncontrollably and makes her feel like she can't breathe. It's unlike asthma because there's no medicine to control it. And one of the VCD triggers for her is exhaust from buses and trucks. And complete example, and this is where I think it's a health and safety issue, and my daughter's just one example. We were riding our bikes to school, which we want to walk and ride our bikes. We don't want to drive, just to add to the problem. And she, of course, went into a VCD attack after a vehicle passed with this exhaust. So it's, and that took her out. It took hours to calm this coughing. And it's not just her. There's many students at the school with asthma. And I'm just astounded that an emission or an air quality study hasn't been part of this feasibility study, because now more money must be spent to do it, not to mention the traffic study as well. I'm really just heartbroken by the thought of it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next up. Oops, go ahead. What did I just do? Ms. Graham.
Hi, good evening. Frances Graham from Fort Washington. Apologies if I missed this in the beginning, but I am voicing my concern about the bus depot as well. And as I had previously noted when this came up before, the main thing to consider is the health of the students in that Fort Washington school. While this location may be a quick win, in my opinion, it is the wrong decision. Besides the fact that the school board does not have the money at this time for a project of this size. Before moving ahead, I don't even think it should be moved any further. I think a quick look at research into how unhealthy it is for the students. Scientific American quotes, "For school children, health experts say diesel exhaust presents a serious health concern, especially to asthmatics, because it can trigger asthma attacks. The CDC has published an article that states, diesel exhaust from idling school buses can accumulate on and around the bus and pose a health risk, particularly to children. When buses idle in the schoolyard, the exhaust can pollute the air inside the school building and pose a health risk to children throughout the day. Exposure to diesel exhaust can cause lung damage and respiratory problems. Now, that is obviously for school buses right in, next to the school, but it's prudent to realize that this is obviously a health risk for students and it should not happen. My second point I would like to bring up is about for the tax increase. While Andy did a beautiful presentation and really trying to spell it down so that we can all understand, and I appreciate that, the option stopped at 2.5. You started with 3.0, went down to 2.5. I thought this in the last meeting. Why were the options for it lower than 2.5 as the board was struggling with, should we be 2.4 and playing with numbers? Why wasn't it asked to show examples of what would 2.3 look like? What would 2.0 look like? This is a big decision that should not be, and I know you do it every month and you're talking about it, but it seems like more time should be spent looking at the lesser options as well to be able to make a good decision. I know at a previous meeting also, separate from this, Dr. Yanni had done a great presentation about numbers of students or number of people in our community. And speaking, this is an anecdotal story, but in speaking with 6 people recently, 5 of the 6 said that when their students are done high school in Upper Dublin, they plan to move because of the taxes forever increasing. So it's, small now, the real estate market is very hot. It is something to consider that we are a community. The goal should not be just, churn of community members, based on age. We should be able to keep our retirees here, our senior citizens here, and the forever tax increases could be prohibiting that in the future. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Next up, Ms. Riley.
Hi, you can hear me? Yes?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. My name is Katie Riley. I live in Fort Washington. I would just like to reiterate what has previously been mentioned, that the idea of a bus depot behind an elementary school terrifies me and really makes me kind of crazy. And I just hope that the board will consider the health impacts more than the financial costs. I know it's funny that we're having a conversation about the budget and tax increases and complaining about that at the same time we're complaining about saving money by putting a bus depot behind the school. But I think some things are more important than money, and our children's health is one of those things. I also actually have like 5 hopefully quick-ish questions that perhaps you can answer if there is a response time. Mark, you mentioned we are moving away from diesel, and I wasn't sure if that was the district specifically or like more of a general term or general statement when you were talking about emissions and how they're different between gas and diesel. And I just didn't know if like there were plans for the district to move away from diesel buses specifically. My second question or concern is that there was not any mention of the traffic impact of putting, unless I missed it, and I apologize if I did, but the traffic impact of putting the bus depot by the elementary school, because it already is crowded. And I bless those crossing guards for putting their lives at risk every day to keep the kids and everyone safe at Highland and Fort Washington Avenue. My third question is, will the copy of the presentation that I think Arif was his name gave in the beginning, will that be made available to the public, or, do I need to fill out a right to know request or something like that? Then actually my fourth question is related to Andy's presentation, which I believe he gave something similar when you had the town hall about the finances. And I didn't write down, I'm sorry if I get the wording wrong, because I didn't write it down as specifically as I wanted to, but you were comparing the millage rates to provide the districts and showing that ours was, you know, in the middle, and that was our 2021 millage rate. And then you compared like the millage rate per assessed value, and you talked about how Wissahickon, and then there was another district has like a more commercial tax base. Those numbers were from 2018. I should be more specific about which slides I'm talking about, but I was just curious how you compared numbers from 2021 to, and then brought in 2018 on the next two slides. I suppose I can send you an email if you don't know what I'm talking about, but that was my fourth question. And then finally, putting on my PTA hat here for a second, I have to ask, the Fort Washington PTA is just wondering what you need from us to move forward with the outdoor classroom. I know there were some questions at the last meeting. I'm sorry I couldn't attend, but I think there's a little either miscommunication or confusion because we heard it was on hold and then we heard it wasn't on hold. So if there's something you need from us, please let myself or Jen Fountain know. So, because we would like to get this done. I think we have the money, we can make sure it's sustainable, and I think it would be a real benefit to the students and the school. It's important for us to do. So that is all I have to say. Thank you for your time.
All right, thank you. And yeah, we'll answer the questions once community input is closed. Next up is Ms. Brister. Go ahead.
Okay. So I want to start with the tax
Anita,
increase.
please just state your name and where you live.
Oh. Anita Brister, still in Fort Washington.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to start with the tax increase and hope I can get to a couple other things. So I really, really appreciate what Mr. Henderson said tonight. I have 10 pages of notes, but the note I have on what he said was he'd like to use some of the 5 million for tax relief. Yes, thank you. Doesn't look like it's going to happen, but that's what I've been sort of thinking since the last meeting. I did send a short email to a few people this morning, including Dr. Yanni, Mr. Leckman, and Mark, saying that I see so many positives, so much surplus in this budget. It's actually one of the most, it's a lot of revenue, and it doesn't matter to me that it's one-time revenue. You can't go around saying it's one-time revenue, therefore we'll screw the taxpayers. And I know that's my words, not yours. But the bottom line is, if this was up to me, I would come down to 2%. But if you wanted to do 2.1%, 2.2%, that's all very viable. Because as Mr. Henderson said, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said, why not take do a little bit less into the capital reserve fund? According to Mr. Leckman's budget, 75,000 equals a reduction. For every reduction of 0.1%, you need $75,000. So you would still have, if you even came down to 2%, a full percent lower than where you started at 3%, you'd still have 4.6 something to put into capital reserve, which is a very reasonable amount. I feel that, and if I had a long time, I guess you'd regret it, because I'm just going to say the words that Dr. Plattis used to say. When we had difficult budget cycles when he was here, he used to constantly talk about the concept of shared sacrifice. All I can say is I, as a taxpayer, really appreciated that concept, that he recognized that taxpayers, many had sacrificed for years in putting a lot into the schools, and that sometimes it's good if a school board takes into consideration that many people in all communities, and this includes Upper Dublin, have gotten less income this year. So even 2.5 might be a struggle for some people, especially if they're on a fixed income. And I totally agree with the woman, Frances Graham, who spoke, that I think it was her that said, we want to keep our seniors here. We don't want them to have to flee to Florida or be told by board members to flee to Florida or move to Florida. Bus garage, I agree with Ginny, needs a whole separate meeting. Too many questions to even go through tonight. One last thing that I think I may have to have a real conversation with maybe Dr. Yanni and Mr. Leckman, or do a right to know, but I'm just going to throw it out there for now. If you can answer a little bit of it tonight. I'm perplexed by the slide that always shows this revenue gap. I mean, I understand it, but I guess what I don't understand is what are the assumptions in that slide? Because it shows 3 years from now, a $5 million gap. Whereas the way I'm looking at it is, if you would include retirements, that would bring that down. And yet I don't think retirements are included, although I realize you have to guess. And there would be a whole new teacher's contract by then. Why would you ever negotiate a teacher's contract that's going to give us a $5 million gap? So I'm missing whatever the assumptions are in that revenue expenses slide. If you could clarify, I'd appreciate it. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Next up, Ms. Burns.
Hi, thanks, Mark. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right, thanks. I appreciate it. My first question goes out to Darlene. Darlene, can you please speak to the community about the reasons why we're still holding these meetings via a Zoom? I know you and I spoke back and forth on email, but I would really appreciate if you could speak to the community and let them know the reasons why we're still holding these meetings Zoom and not also in person.
So let me just interrupt, just to be clear, comments should be addressed to the whole board. Certainly Darlene may answer that one, but comments are for the whole board, not for
My
individuals.
question to the whole board is, could you speak
Yeah.
to the community about the reasons why we're still holding these meetings? I mean, Darlene's going to answer the question, Mark, but I mean,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, the community wants to know why, and they're asking me, they're asking several people, why are we still holding these meetings only on Zoom, and why we're not also doing them in person, like the township is now doing. So I just would like her to address that, please. And then I'd also like to address Darlene or the rest of the board, that if you choose to still do these meetings come the September, could you please turn the videos, cameras on, so that when I'm speaking right now, it is a black box with only my name on it. But yet when Mark talks, or Darlene talks, or Dr. Yanni talks, or a guest talks, I get to see that person's face, but you don't get to see my face. So I've always wondered why you chose to do that. So if we move forward come September and we're still doing these meetings online, I would please request that you could actually turn our cameras on, because it's extremely impersonal to have just a black box. You see me right there, black. It just says Lisa Burns. I'd love for people to see my face too. And then my third question goes to Andy. I don't think we spoke about the COVID relief money. And if you could please speak about the couple buckets that we have. I think we still have over 700,000 to spend. And then we have that 1.1 million. I'm not sure if I saw that in there. So correct me if I'm wrong, but where are we spending the 1.8 COVID relief money that I know has to be spent by a certain date? I believe it's 2023. So those are my three questions. Two to the board or Darlene, and my third question to Andy. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Just to give another moment, if anyone else would like to speak, please raise your virtual hand. All right, seeing none, we will close community input and see if anyone would like to address any of these comments. I'll start with Dr. Yanni.
With regard to the project at FWES, Mr. Lester will be back in touch with the members of the PTO. I'll let Mr. Leckman answer some of the financial questions, and then I'm sure I'll chime in another time or two before we're done.
All right, Andy?
Yeah, I'll do my best. I wrote down some stuff. Certainly help me if you think I've missed something. So diesel versus gasoline. So yes, we have diesel, we have gasoline buses. The vans are all gasoline. Chris Robbins, who's our director of transportation, is transitioning to gasoline buses. We did replace 5 diesel buses with 5 gasoline buses. Actually, it's a bid that we just approved a couple of months ago. So we're transitioning our fleet over to gasoline, and 5 are happening for next year. A copy of the presentation, all of the presentations that were given tonight will be included in the Finance Committee agenda tomorrow. So yes, they will all be there. You don't have to write to know them. Was a traffic study done as part of this feasibility study? There has not been a traffic study done yet. I believe that would be done as part of the land development process. I believe there was some traffic study done back when the high school was built, but that would all need to be redone, and that's sort of part of Dewey's projections. The slides in my presentation around millage rates from 2021 versus assessed value from 2018, that question. So those graphics come from Forecast 5, which is a software that we use for a lot of the data that we get in many different areas. So yes, I agree with you that millage rates are sort of current, based on current year's millage rates, and assessed value is sort of a lagging number that we have access to. But what I would say about that, I still do feel like it's a fair it's a fair way to look at it, because assessed value are very large numbers and they change only fractionally from year to year. So there wouldn't be any drastic changes, even though we are looking at assessed value on a bit of a lag. But I do understand your question. The assumptions that we use for the budget. So we actually, I don't remember if it's October, Finance Committee meeting, we go through as a committee all of the assumptions that are used in our forecast. So you can go back and certainly find it where we discussed it in greater detail, but I would also point you to our budget narrative document, which is included on the agenda. Page 8 and onto page 9 goes through all of the details of what makes up that forecast. So all the details are there. And then on the COVID bucket, so all of that information is in the other financial documents on our monthly financial reports. We are currently working, so we had 2 buckets that needed to be used almost immediately back in the October through December time period. The ESSER dollars, and especially the newest one, the ESSER ARP dollars, which is the 1.1 million we have access to. We have multiple years to spend those funds, and we are currently working on, and should have done by September, a full plan around how we intend to use those dollars. So because they're multi-year funds, we're not rushing, especially since some of the rules are still being identified as to how you can use those dollars and what the requirements are when you use those dollars. We're not rushing to spend that money. So we're going to make sure to put a thoughtful plan around all those dollars, and especially as it relates to our facility condition assessment and capital projects that we may be able to identify projects that specifically related to air quality and things like that could apply. So it's not a rush to spend the dollars. It's building a thoughtful plan around it.
Andy, if I could just jump in, and I'm sorry, my audio was cutting out a little bit. There's a whole stakeholder engagement piece around the ARP funds that is yet to be defined, but there is going to be a process coming from the state that will outline, much like comprehensive planning or strategic planning, what stakeholder groups need to be represented around the table as we build that plan and then approve that plan.
So Mr. Serta, if you think I've missed anything, let me know. I think I covered all the things that applied to me.
I also see Mrs. Ianetti has her hand up.
All right, go ahead, Jen.
Yeah, no, this was just 2 things I heard during public comments. One is there was talk about at Fort Washington, they use Field of Dreams for field day. And with the information we have right now, they would still be able to use that. Correct me if I'm wrong, like they were just, yeah. So
That's right. If we're talking about the field itself, the proposal does not touch the field.
Right. And then the car parade, that was really for during pandemic times, and next year we would hopefully have an in-person 5th grade promotion ceremony, Dr. Yanni.
That would be the plan.
Yeah, okay, just wanted to, I didn't want that to get confused in with this feasibility study, those two issues.
Okay, Darlene, I see your hand is up.
Yes, I just wanted to address the concerns of Mrs. Burns. And I know she and I have communicated, and I heard her say that she wanted me to share the information that I've shared with her to the whole community. And again, the board did make a decision to conduct its June meetings via Zoom to remain consistent with our practices for this entire year. The board does not meet in July, and we do resume in August. And as this year was ending, we made the decision to continue as we have been doing throughout the year. The other thing that we were really happy about was the fact that we had such increased attendance throughout this year, despite the fact that we were dealing with the pandemic. And so that was the good news that came out of, being virtual throughout this year. But we are excited that we will be looking to resume our in-person meetings in August as we look forward to the upcoming school year. And if any other board members would like to respond, I welcome any other comments. And Dr. Yanni, if you would like to respond, I'd appreciate that as well.
I would just say that, yeah, what Dr. Davis said, thinking about when we resume in August, we will be resuming in person, most likely in either the Cardinal Room or the high school cafeteria. The location is to be determined, but we will be in person.
All right, and then the one other thing I wanted to address, a couple of people suggested that the bus depot is a big topic and deserves its own meeting, possibly a town hall. I don't disagree with that. I feel like we're pretty early in the process at the moment. We're certainly not committed at this point to doing it. I still feel like I'm trying to understand whether this is maybe feasible is no longer exactly the right word, but I think this committee was clear that we want to figure out how we would answer the emissions question. So I look forward to hearing that response. So there's still more work to do. I think when we have a clearer picture of what we're considering, it may be appropriate to have a separate meeting for it. But I don't think we're there yet. Any other comments or questions from the committee, the board, the administration? All right, I don't hear anybody. So with that, I will announce our next Finance Committee meeting will be Wednesday, August 18th. We will not have a July meeting, as we've been saying. We will go back to Wednesdays, Wednesday, August 18th at 6 p.m. and we are adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Good night,
See you
everyone.
later.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.